There's only one place you can hear Jonathan Mosen, and that's right here, the home of the fun guys. This is Mushroom FM.
Mosen at Large is coming at you in just a moment here at the home of the fun guys, Mushroom FM. 3 fantastic hours of talk thanks to you. And then at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, Steve Cutway is here as we cut way over to Canada for another edition of the early years. He's thinking about spring, which it is where he is. Dan Sweeney has another edition of One Hit Wonders at 7, and we go live to Iowa and the Snowman at 8 Eastern with Snow White FM.
Mushroom FM.
This is Mushroom FM.
Welcome in. It's another edition of Mosen at Large, live here at the home of the fun guys, Mushroom FM, also on YouTube, Facebook Live, and today, as a bit of an experiment, Clubhouse 2. On the show today, more on the accessibility overlay controversy, and is there such a thing as blind culture?
Mosen at Large Podcast.
Really good to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being here. And if you would like to be in touch with the show, well, you can drop me an email, and that email could have an audio attachment, or you could write it down, and you can send it in to Jonathan, that's JONATHAN, at mushroomfm.com. You can also tweet with the Mushroom FM hashtag, so you just write the number sign and Mushroom FM anywhere in your tweet, and you can use your Twitter hashtag tracker thinger, which basically means you bring up the search in your Twitter and track the hashtag to find out what other listeners are talking about and contribute to the conversation if you would like. And also, if you prefer to leave a voicemail on the good old-fashioned telephone, sometimes simple is best, then you can do that, and you can call the listener line on 864-60-MOSEN, 864-606-6736.
Hi Jonathan, it's Tim in het Veld. I really missed the normal Mosen at Large experience, but I think you were right in spending the full 3 hours on Accessibility because it's a really disturbing development. I was impressed by the way you interviewed Michael Hingson. You hit the nail on the head. And as an eloquent blind person, I stood on the podium more than once to demonstrate my assistive technology to a sighted audience. And if you've ever done that, you know how much influence such a presentation can have. People really feel like, oh, you open up our eyes, figuratively speaking. Now, if a guy like Michael Hingson, who obviously has the skills to give that type of presentation and who's also playing the 9/11 card, is defending the swindle, and I know it's a strong word, but I think it's appropriate here, the swindle that Accessibility engages in, it's disturbing. And I'll leave it at that because we need to stay professional, but I felt really disturbed by some of the statements he made in that interview. Now, as I mentioned before, I work as an accessibility consultant, and my clients sometimes ask me about overlays. Not overlays like Accessibility, but things like Read Speaker. That's a button that they put on a website, and if you press that button, it reads the text on the website. Or should they put a high contrast or a large font button on their website? And my answer is no. I don't want to compare this sort of functionality to what Accessibility is doing, but still this functionality is going to destabilize the website. It's probably not going to work well on all platforms, and if you build the website according to standards, it should not be necessary. And I typically use the analogy that the website builder is building a highway, and it's his responsibility to build the highway according to standards, in the case of a website WCAG. But the responsibility of the end user of the highway is to ensure that he has a suitable car for driving on that highway, which he knows how to operate. And if somebody doesn't have a suitable car or can't drive in it, you can build the greatest possible highway, but it's not going to be a success story. Although I see the point that overlays like Read Speaker or high contrast functionality may have value for users who are not so familiar with their web browser, I think that increasingly the web browsers and other user agent technology is offering great solutions for achieving high contrast or for reading a website that conforms to standards. Now even screen readers are increasingly built in. So I think that it's better to just leave the responsibility for such things with the user agent developers, and that website builders focus their limited time and budget on ensuring that their website is accessible and meets the standards. And that can be a challenge. I recently advised the developers of a government website offering access to legislation, and they used the HTML deletion and insertion tags to mark changes in the legal text. To demonstrate what deletion and insertion tags do, here's a little internal memo as it is read by NVDA.
Heading Level 1 Revised Memo from the CEO. We will deleted purchase inserted download 10,000 deleted $2,000 licenses inserted free copies of deleted JAWS for Windows inserted non-visual desktop inserted access open parent NVDA close parent comma. Because JAWS deleted reads our intranet so well inserted does not read the HTML del and ins tags we inserted use on our intranet dot.
JAWS does not read deletion and insertion tags. You can only indirectly learn that they are there because the deletion and insertion tags in the web browser also changes the font attributes, so you can ask for the font attributes or enable them on your Braille display, but you have to explicitly enable font attributes, otherwise you will never know about the presence of the deletion or insertion tags. I reported this to Freedom Scientific, and Freedom Scientific introduced support for deletion and insertion tags in one build of JAWS, just like NVDA does, but then removed it after users complained that the deletion and insertion tags was causing information overload, which may be because they were used inappropriately on some websites, etc. Rather than making it configurable, Freedom Scientific chose to remove the support for the deletion and insertion tags. So now the question is, will we have to insert on our website screen reader only text, deleted, inserted, instead of the tags? No. If Freedom Scientific deliberately chooses not to follow the standard by not reading the deletion and insertion tags, maybe they have good reasons for it, but it's their problem and the problem of their users. If I got questions about this now, I would tell people that either they should switch to NVDA, because NVDA does follow this standard, or they can indirectly read the deletion and insertion tags using attributes. But it's not our task to work around the deliberate choice that Freedom Scientific made not to read those tags. It's not our responsibility. We build the highway, they build the car. And the final point, I think there are many accessibility consultants, at least in the Netherlands, who create an atmosphere like, if not all your videos are 100% subtitled and audio described, we label your website as inaccessible, you don't get our fancy certificate, and we'll make sure that first the hell is sued out of you, and then we send you to hell to burn for all eternity. And instilling such fear is really great for their business case, because then they can sell a lot of hours to advise how to solve every last problem. Now, don't get me wrong, I stand behind WCAG. It's a great standard and it leads everything I do in this area. But when Michael Hingson is saying that what matters is the ultimate user experience rather than the exact conformance to the standard, he is absolutely right. Of course, we have to insist on following standards, no compromises there, but there are different ways of telling people that. And if we are too obsessive or put it in a negative manner towards developers, then they will just abandon us in the end, because we have such high demands and we cost so much money that they can't afford us. And if that happens, the stage is open for swindlers who will claim that they can solve the problem for a small fee. So I think legislation can be a good thing, but it's really important that we don't instill fear or give developers the feeling, we never achieve this because it's so difficult. In my advisory, I follow the standards, but I also understand that accessibility is a process. Developers are doing the best they can, but they're very busy people who need to take care of many things. And it's really important that in our advisory, we are constructive and we focus on getting those problems solved that actually prevent people from getting the job done. I think being constructive and sometimes a bit liberal, understanding also the developer perspective, works way better and will get way more websites accessible much sooner.
Julie McCullough says the farther this discussion has gone, the more serious I realise it is. Is the purpose of Accessibility to help make websites accessible to people with disabilities, or to help marketers to find a way to feel that they are complying with accessibility guidelines? They may not have contacted or wanted to hear from people with disabilities because their purpose might really be to help companies to think that they're being compliant and that they will be protected from litigation by their supposed compliance. Bless Michael Hingson. I think his heart is in the right place. I think he sincerely wants to help this company to make websites accessible to people who are blind or who have other disabilities. I hope he can, and that he doesn't get burned by finding out that this company is only interested in making money at the expense of both marketers and people with disabilities. I sincerely hope that Michael can help this company to change some of their ways, and that he won't find he's being used. Michael Bullis says a few copy and pastes from the Accessibility main page show their market share. Their market share is selling protection. Quote, effortless, a single line of code for 24/7 automated compliance. Protect your business from lawsuits. Keep safe from lawsuits. Accessibility is trusted to protect over 100,000 websites worldwide. How do we protect you from litigation? Unquote. The reason Accessibility may be less than responsive is that we, blind people, aren't paying the bills. The focus is on the business, not the end user. They are promising this to the end user, the business, as a complete legal protection and accessibility solution. This quote, again from their front page, is significant. Quote, thanks to AI, the dream of an accessible web is finally attainable, unquote. No, it's not. It may be at some point in the future, but for now, AI is still a hoped-for outcome, not a current reality. I personally believe AI will ultimately be a huge part of web access, driving, and hundreds of other things. I think the outcome for Accessibility is up for grabs. Can they restructure their focus to be a partner with us? I don't know, but thanks for a wonderful show. Robert Kinget writes, hi Jonathan, thank you for covering this topic. I'm an expert witness for many law firms in the United States and internationally. My many encounters with Accessibility have caused me to strongly dislike them and similar overlays, but not because it doesn't work, which it doesn't. Instead, I'd like to illustrate why I dislike their philosophy. To start off, I'm an anti-capitalist. Their approach to accessibility stinks heavily of consolidated accessibility. I'm against this for a number of reasons. Even though we value capitalism more than education here in America, I feel that embedding accessible design into educational courses will grow inclusive design far greater than a capitalist tech company hoping everybody will be so dependent on them that the client cannot leave because education wasn't provided. If people really want to improve accessibility, the solution needs to be baked into CMS platforms and web design tools and services. I don't think capitalism can solve the accessibility problem. Money will never make a website accessible. Community efforts may seem slower, but community strength is better than company dependence and consolidation.
Hey Jonathan, it's Zach here, and I'm just sending some thoughts in on Accessibility. I just want to quickly start out by saying that I had been sort of hearing murmurings of Accessibility on Twitter for maybe a month or so. I can't really remember when it started, but I sort of thought at the time, this isn't really a huge deal. I'd encountered some layers like this before. I don't know if they were Accessibility necessarily. I think one of them was AudioEyes. I think Wired may have had one at some point, or was it Gizmodo? I'm not totally sure. Either of those could be wrong, but I know on some news sites for sure I've seen this. And I kind of thought at the time, okay, this isn't like a huge issue. This is not really something that people need to get this upset about. But listening to this podcast, and I did listen to most of the live stream as well, really opened me up to the sort of the harm that this company and others like it are doing to especially the blind community. So I wanted to kind of give some thoughts. Their disregard for the experience of professionals in this field who have been doing this for a very long time really, really makes me angry. Chancey and Sam and, Adrian as well, it seems, have done a lot in this area and definitely know what they're talking about when it comes to proper formatting and, presenting tables properly and lists and all that kind of stuff that was kind of touched on in the podcast. And Accessibility just essentially saying, well, screw you, we don't really need to listen to what you have to say because we have a solution that we know works when it clearly doesn't, is just, I don't understand how you can have this in 2021, These people, Chancey and everyone else have been in this field for a very, very long time. They have a lot of experience. Some of them use screen readers on a daily basis. They know what they want and they know how to present content properly. And I'm not saying that they speak for everyone by any means, but at least a baseline. They know how this stuff works. And I just don't understand why Accessibility thinks that it's okay to essentially step all over that and undo like years and years of progress in this space. So further to that, your interview with Hinkson was very informative in terms of really kind of different sides of this spectrum. It almost reminded me of sort of Republican versus Democrat in a way. I want to kind of just touch on Michael's sort of early comments in the interview when it came to his own website. And he had to use Namecheap, and he encountered Accessibility on there and then was, upgrading his site. He mentioned that he hired a coder who was not really aware of accessibility. I don't know if he was the one who hired it. I don't know if he has a team working on this. But regardless, he should really know better, quite frankly. I'm not here to personally attack anybody or anything like that. But in this instance, he really should know better. He's been in this space for a very long time. I've spoken to him at least once. And he seems, to be relatively knowledgeable on screen readers and accessibility. So the fact that he would just hire somebody who didn't know about accessibility, yet pay them anyway, and choose to have them develop his site, and then go in and essentially use a Band-Aid to patch up those accessibility mistakes that should have been fixed from the beginning, I don't really get how you do that. I don't understand how that works, especially if you're blind. What logic do you have to come to in order to reach a decision like that? How do you justify paying money to somebody who clearly does not know about accessibility and not even training them or educating them or giving them resources and saying, hey, this is how you do it, but just letting them do the work anyway and presumably paying them money and then saying, okay, they didn't really do a good job, whatever, I'm going to blame it on them, not on myself for hiring them in the first place, and then patch up those holes with a product that really does not do a good job. Michael did also point out that Adrian had no right to speak on behalf of blind people, but I don't believe he was speaking on behalf of blind people. He was simply saying that this service is not fit for purpose, and he backed that up with a lot of technical facts, and it didn't seem like it was more an opinion piece. It seemed more like it was, here's the evidence, let me present this to you, and you decide, kind of. And he gave his opinion, but he also presented a lot of evidence and videos of him using JAWS to try and navigate the site. And, he seems to know what he's talking about in this space. So I absolutely think that he had every right to make that blog post, and I do agree with a lot of what he said. Michael mentioned testing, and that sighted people get tested in terms of features, like on Facebook and Twitter, for example. They will see new settings and features and whatnot. And blind people should have the same thing applied to them. I absolutely disagree with that, especially on this scale. If you are essentially breaking websites and calling this a quote-unquote test, I don't see how that's a good thing. You are disrupting professionals' lives. People have jobs to do. And when the technology does not work the way that it is intended to, and they did not specifically enroll in something like a beta where, they are made aware that things could break, things should not break in this capacity. Yes, everything has bugs, but these are not bugs. These are deliberate changes that were made without consulting many blind people. I don't really believe Accessibility when they say, "Oh, we worked with blind people," because clearly you haven't. If you've been doing this for 3 years and you are just now starting to work with a select group of people and have not even contacted blindness organizations. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of blindness organizations myself, but they seem to know what they're talking about when it comes to standards and things like that. And I believe they should be involved in something like this, as fundamental as changing the web. It doesn't make sense to me. You should not be enrolled in testing without your permission, period, for something like this.
Kylie Maloney says, "Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for such a thorough review of the accessibility overlay from Accessibility. However, there is a larger concern, which for me has nothing to do with accessibility, as important as that is. Let's say I got together some friends with a large amount of venture capital and set out on a project which I was sure would benefit Māori, that's the indigenous people of New Zealand, by the way, without consulting any iwi, which is the Māori word for tribe, or even speaking with individuals whom I knew. Tangata whenua, that's Māori, would be justified in labelling me racist. Here is a group who claims a positive and helpful motive, but who, until recent complaints made it necessary, couldn't bring themselves to even speak with those they are claiming to help. Furthermore, when people from our community have the temerity to express any sentiment other than abject gratitude, have the gall to play the victim. In my view, this is the worst kind of patronisation, meriting neither consideration nor respect. Let's be straight, this is, and always has been, purely a money-making venture at disabled people's expense."
For all things Mosen at Large, check out the website, where you can listen to episodes online, subscribe using your favourite podcast app, and contact the show. Just point your browser to podcast.mosen.org. That's podcast.mosen.org.
Jonathan Mosen, Mosen at Large Podcast.
We talked last week on the show about the ability to block these accessibility overlays if you choose to do that via an ad blocker software package or perhaps even at your router level. But Numa Solutions is coming up with an idea to make it even simpler. This is the artist formerly known as Ceratech. And we've got the two key people from there, Mike Calvo and Matt Campbell. Welcome, guys.
Hi, stop. You're terrible.
What happened to Ceratech? I mean, that's a brand, it's been around a long time. Why did you change the name like that, Mike?
Kind of new vibe, new group of people. Matt is a co-owner now, and we just felt that Numa was a little bit more aligned with where we were going. And basically, the investment folks and I just kind of said, we're done with this. And we packed it away, and everybody went home except for Matt and me. And we stayed on the ship, and we are rebuilding it.
I do wonder, when you look at your soup drinker device or your Google Home or whatever, do you think, man, I was ahead of the curve. I was thinking about this stuff in 2000.
Well, it is scary to me to hear how similar the soup drinker and our previous Freedom Box, how interestingly similar the voices are, although the soup drinker does it much more eloquently than we used to. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad somebody did it.
She doesn't say, "Okay, Jonathan, what would you like to do now?" in quite the same way as you had.
No, she didn't.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about, and welcome, Matt. Matt, of course, is no stranger to us at Mushroom FM and has helped us out over the years. Let's talk about this solution that you guys have come up with. And I'll let you guys choose which one of you starts us off on this. But why did you decide to dabble in this controversial issue of blocking accessibility overlays?
We agree with the predominant opinion that was expressed on your podcast last week that accessibility overlays are doing much more harm than good. They're not actually solving the problem, and they're not actually solving the problem of web accessibility. And in telling businesses that they are solving the problem while making it worse, they're hindering actual improvements to the accessibility of websites because businesses think that they can just drop in a line of code and they're done, when in fact that's not the case. And so when I was listening to the podcast last week, I heard the email from Stephen Clower and I heard about Accessibe Gone, and I thought, well, that's nice, but it requires the user to be fairly tech savvy in order to do it. And so why don't we develop a little browser extension that can just do it for the user? And at the same time, I realized we could collect some useful information about the sites with accessibility overlays that are being blocked to help the community do some advocacy to contact these companies and let them know their supposed solution is not actually working.
You're calling this Accessi Bye-Bye. How do you get it? Can you get it yet? And then we'll talk a bit about the data collection that you're doing and the privacy safeguards around that.
You can visit us at accessibybye.org. And the only reason we put a .org behind it is because this is not a long-term project, at least we hope. We hope to send a loud and clear message that we are not pleased as a community. Matt is, in his usual very customary diplomatic way, being very nice. I'm not such a nice guy. I'm really pissed at these companies. The way that they, can I say that here?
You just did.
Right. The thing to me that just astonishes me to no end, and Accessibe is the one we've got our community kind of guns aimed at right now, but they're all guilty of creating and making money on us as a community without any involvement by us as a community, and then coming back later and expecting grace from a community that they've done nothing but just basically make money, millions. I'm not talking about thousands or tens, hundreds, millions of dollars on for the last 3 years at minimum. And it was disgusting to me. And for this community to decide, I mean, everybody can do what they want, but Jonathan, if you or I or Matt or others, even the folks that have been on your show before talking about these things, committed an error or bad judgment or whatever, we've been members of this community. We've been participating in this community. So, a little grace from the community might be expected. I've certainly put my foot in my mouth more than once, and will probably do it again before I leave this planet, and have had to depend on some grace from this community. But for folks like the Accessibes of the world that have done nothing but suck us dry and make us look like just, pissed off blind people that want to do nothing more than just sue these poor companies that are, leaving us outside and putting up keep out blind people signs, that's just not right to me. And this is why I fully embrace blocking this. We will, obviously people can install what they want. We will, as these companies start to align themselves with the needs of our community and their customers and making sure that they align, we will start removing them from this block. But we're pretty adamant about this. And I thank you again for a very balanced show last week. One of the most balanced shows I've heard you do in the 20 years I've been listening to you.
Well, thank you so much.
Jonathan, to answer one of your earlier questions, the extension is not available just yet, but only because we are waiting on the Google Chrome Web Store team to approve it.
Yeah, it should be out today. And it maybe even by the time folks hear this.
Well, who knows? I suspect that it triggered manual review, and it could be Monday.
Yeah, fair enough. So is this any different from me going in at the router level and blocking those IP addresses? It's essentially doing the same thing as I understand it, but just with a simpler user interface for people who might be a bit confused about how to do that. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, our block list is based on domain names rather than IP addresses because IP addresses can and do change.
Yeah.
So there's that. The other difference is, in addition to blocking the overlays, the extension will send anonymous data about how many people are using the extension, how often it's being used, and the sites and overlays that are being blocked. And one of the things that we are displaying on accessibyby.org, though there isn't really any data there yet, is the list of top websites with overlays that are being blocked. So we display the domain names of the website, namecheap.com or whatever.
By the way, you can block, or you can actually stop that data collection as well in the settings.
That's right.
Kudos, by the way, to our new member of the team here as of about a year and a half ago, David Calvo, who is my son and is heading up our machine learning efforts. He got frustrated with this thing and wrote it in a couple days.
Very good. So in a way then, it's actually a way to contribute to the debate or the data, because then presumably people can say to these companies, hey, have a look, your name is sort of displayed on the wall of shame, as it were, as a company.
We're not specifically calling it a wall of shame because we realize that the businesses that are using the overlays don't necessarily know any better, so they don't deserve to be shamed. But yes, that is kind of what it is.
Interesting concept. Now, this is a Chrome extension, and that means, I presume, that it's going to work with all Chromium browsers, including the new Microsoft Edge, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Are you thinking of a Firefox extension for those who are using that?
This should be since Firefox adopted the Chrome web extensions API a few years ago. This should be compatible with Firefox. We just have to put in a little extra work to submit it to the Mozilla add-ons.
I'll bring it to David's attention. But by the way, we want to be clear. This is not, while Accessiby is the latest company that we're angry about, and one of the things I'm personally most angry about is that they had the audacity to go out and pull what I call pull a Moses with Michael Hinkson. Michael Hinkson is a straight up awesome dude who's been around this community for years. And for them to go and basically hire him and say, hey, Moses, go talk to your people and chill them the hell out, is exactly what they did. There are no blind people in leadership in that company that I know of.
Well, would you not call a chief vision officer a leadership role?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, okay. When was the last time?
It's a fancy sounding title, but it's not actual leadership.
And it's and I find it to be patronizing. The only reason it's not patronizing is because Michael thought of it. But no, it's not a management position. All he is an advisory position where he says, hey, you really ticked people off when you did such and such and did this and that. That's it. So make a change. Are you sure, Michael? Just tell him it's coming. And that's not what we expect as a community. We certainly, as a company, Numa believes in augmented remediation of media, machine-assisted remediation of media. And we are developing a platform and have been for a couple of years now. And you know what we do, Jonathan? We actually go to the community we're going to serve, man. Imagine that. And ask for
not only that, we are part of the community ourselves. Yeah, so obviously we don't presume to speak for the whole community, but we are blind, or in my case, low vision people. So combined with the fact that we go to the
So that's accessibyby.org, all joined together, and you expect that to be live anytime.
Yeah, the website is live now, and you can go and take a peek at it. Unfortunately, and there's a blog post going to be available on numasolutions.com. And because we're blind and we wanted to be funny, we spelled Numa with a P. So it's PNEUMA solutions.com. And you can visit there and read a blog post that Matt and I put out about this entire situation. We are not fighting Accessiby. We are fighting an industry of creating overlays, of which Accessiby is just the latest offender that's come into our community's radar.
By the way, Mike, you say I'm diplomatic, but I am capable of ranting. Several months ago, one of my sighted friends drew my attention to Userway, which is another one of these accessibility overlays, and asked me what I thought of it, and I emailed him a good rant on on what I felt to be wrong with Userway. So I might forward that to you guys just so you can see it. But yeah.
Well, I think what we can be clear about from last week's episode is that there are people who genuinely are having additional difficulties because of these accessibility overlays, and there's no denying that. And so for people who perhaps want to get back to being able to use sites that they could once use before, this could be a lifesaver. It's easy to implement, and that added advantage of collecting data from the community that could potentially be passed on. So that's accessibybye.org from Numerous Solutions, and the website's live. The extension should be live shortly, working with pretty much every modern browser. So thank you both for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. We
Thank you.
appreciate it as well.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
Hello, Jonathan. This is Roger Peterson. I used the Brannon slate and the Cuba Rhythm slate at the Idaho School for the Deaf and Blind way back in the 50s. And in terms of mathematical access, I want to mention that I was very lucky before this person's death to have a chance to meet him. That was kind of the ultimate blind mathematician, Abraham Nemeth. And he seemed to have been most proud of the skill that he learned to be a mathematics professor, to write on the blackboard. And he says he accomplished that, and it stood him in good stead. What a guy. And he also played the piano and told weird jokes. Now, on the matter of dating, I wanted to mention to you, number one, that I have had one sighted partner and one totally blind partner, and now my current partner who is low vision. And I'm totally blind and have been from birth. And my experience has been that the way you find partners is to be in groups, rather stable groups, not groups that come together and go apart again on one night. So the organizations of the blind, for example, for finding other blind people, are the best way. I found my second and third partners in that way. My first partner was in class with me in college, and it was an odd kind of thing. We were in German class talking about ourselves, and it turned out that we knew a bassoonist in common. I knew her as a club owner, and my prospective spouse knew her as her bassoon teacher. Also, in terms of dating, I want to mention that there is the possibility that the sighted person can be a person who has a need to be a caregiver or whatever. And I remember a bunch of us who were blind men with sighted wives were talking, and we found out that all of our wives were either social workers or nurses, or I think librarians was another one that some of them were. But it seemed as though the wives were in sort of helping professions.
Interesting. Thanks very much, Roger. And good to get your Abraham Nemeth recollections as well. I had the privilege of interviewing him for a Blind Line documentary on UEB that I was doing, and it was great to talk to the legend. You know, we grew up studying maths in Nemeth, and then when you grow up, you realize, oh, Nemeth is actually a person. That was pretty cool. I wonder if Banner spells Nemeth with an uppercase N. I actually asked the question legitimately. I don't know the answer to that. Back to the subject of dating when blind, and Andy is responding to one of the anonymous emails. To identify it, I will just say it's the one where everything was numbered all the way down to the decimals. This person's email, says Andy, assumes a lot. You have already covered much of what I would have said on the subject. My sighted wife of 20 years and I both just do what we can to take care of each other. Incidentally, as I listen to this, I am dusting, and she is listening to an audiobook on my Victor Reader.
Hello, Jonathan. It's Gary. Just on the subject of dating, I have only ever dated one blind lady in my life before, and it did have its advantages, but it was also challenging to a certain extent. Advantages being there's a certain understanding with a lot of blind techie stuff and little things like listening to narrated movies. All the sighted girlfriends and my wife, who is sighted, you introduce them to narrated movies, for example, or even audiobooks, and they're fascinated with it. They're really fascinated, but they battle to follow it, and they seem to lose concentration in a short amount of time because they're so used to reading or watching. That is where someone who's blind, you can fill each other with that, and but there are also disadvantages. Transport was quite an issue with the work that I do, being a entertainer. You've got a lot of musical equipment and things to move around. You can't just take your dog's harness or your cane and say, right, I'm going to go off to work on my own. I will see you later. You need someone to drive you around for things like that. I mean, going to the shop is no problem. You just go, want to buy a loaf of bread, you catch your Uber, or you take your dog, that's no problem. I think also there's a lot to be said with how you handle yourself when trying to date someone that's sighted who's never encountered someone who's blind before. I'm very lucky in the sense that I was brought up in a sighted world, so I was brought up as near to a sighted person as possible, where my parents would let me do things such as ride a bicycle, swim, climb trees, do whatever I needed to do. Get hurt sometimes, yes, but they let me be a normal, in brackets, or a regular person as possible. Whereas I've seen other blind people, the social skills is not good, and they move around in their own flat or their own apartment using their legs to follow the couch and moving sideways. Social skills are not good. And most sighted people tend to avoid that person because it looks totally strange in a sighted world, and it's actually very, very sad. So my wife and myself get on very well. There was one or two little things that we're trying to put on the cover of the pool, for example, and she would say, tilt it that way. And I tilt it the wrong way. And then there's a little bit of frustration and a little bit of communication problems and that. But generally there's no problems. And she did say to me one day, and I was quite shocked by this, but she did say to me, if I was less independent or less adequate to do things, she might not have gone for me, which kind of surprised me because it just sounded strange. She knows that I can't see, and I didn't think there would be any sort of issue whatsoever. So there is something to be said for independence and managing to do things such as cooking or doing the washing and, even just trying to fix something around the house. I'm fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of those things to a certain point. And yes, if I do need help, I can say, lend me your eyes and off we go. There's no issue. Then there's things that she needs a hand with and she asks me for help and I do it. So I think there's a very big case of 50-50 and give and take. As far as online dating, I've never dated online. Everybody that I've dated, I have met face to face, and it's taken from there, and you have a good conversation. And I find humor is a very, very good attraction, if I can put it like that, because I will say silly things like, "Can I take you on a blind date?" I mean, that's how I won my wife over in the first conversation. She laughed and she thought it was cute, and that's when we started talking. So I find that confidence, humor, and putting the sighted person at ease makes things a lot easier. There was a friend of mine who tried online dating as a blind person, and he started talking to a lady, and within the first few sentences, he said to me that he told the lady, "Look, I am blind," and she didn't even continue to have any conversation further. She didn't say, "I'm not interested," or didn't greet him. She just went offline, never spoke to him again. And I actually thought that was pretty lousy. If you don't want to take the time to get to know someone, just say, "All right, listen, I'm not interested," and move on. So I said to him, which is exactly what one of your previous listeners said, if she didn't give you the time of day, then she's not worth it. So I would, if I had to do online dating, I would definitely in the beginning say, "Look, I can't see." That is, and then if you want to ask me questions, I'm an open book. Say whatever you like, ask me whatever you like. I'll be more than, because I love showing people, I don't want to say brag, but I love showing people what I can do and what I can't do, because there's always all the stereotypical things like, do you count steps when you walk? And all these silly questions. So I'm always very upfront with that sort of thing. And it's worked for me so far. And My wife and myself get on very well. There's never any issues about sight or non-sight. Even when amongst our circle of friends, I'm not seen as the odd one out or the blindy of the group. I'm seen as just one of the crowd, which is fantastic. Sometimes Rihanna will say to me, I forget that you're blind, or she'll be eating a packet of chips and she'll just hold out the packet, and then I don't take anything because I don't know that she's holding it out for me because she forgets. And I think that is one of the biggest compliments for me.
Julie McCullough says, at the time I tried online dating, you could say that I had 2 strikes against me. I am blind, and at the time I was serving churches in a pastor in an appointive system in which pastors are assigned to churches within a particular region. This in itself is an insecure situation for many men. I tried online dating at the persistent recommendation of my conference's therapist. I had been in a relationship that had fallen apart when the man with whom I was involved started seeing my assistant, moved in with her, and eventually married her. I was uneasy about my therapist's recommendation because I felt that no matter why the relationship fell apart, it would not be wise for me to jump quickly from one relationship to another. Nevertheless, my therapist thought I should try it, and she said that if something were to happen to my mother surely wouldn't want me to be alone. She had no idea what my mother would have wanted. I think my mother would rather have had me be alone than to be with someone who she would feel wasn't right for me. At the time I did this, my mother was still very much alive. Against my better judgment, I did it because I was very depressed at the time. I was afraid that my therapist would make a report to the Board of Ordained Ministry and say that I was non-compliant to her recommendation. I applied to eHarmony because it was thought to be the most reputable online dating service at the time. It probably also asked the most questions. As I attempted to fill out the information, I kept getting timed out and would have to start over. It took all day for me to get it filled out. I finally got it done, and I received communication from a man who came to one of my church services, and we had lunch afterward. He was very nice, but I thought of him as something of a collector of people. I would have seen him again, but we weren't in touch much after we met. I also talked some with a man who I think was from one of the Carolinas, but we never met. From other more personal experiences, some of the cited men who seemed to be the most outgoing towards me seemed to have an odd combination of curiosity and feeling that they could have power over me. In other words, they seemed to have a screw loose somewhere. And Julie goes on to say that she ended up having a committed relationship with someone who has sadly now died and is in a new relationship. Neither of those relationships came about online. So it sounds like the good old-fashioned way of just somehow waiting for something to happen has worked out for Julie. Thanks so much, Julie. It's good to hear from you.
Hey, Jonathan, it's Mike Fair. Interesting show. I like the perspectives on dating and relationships. That's been fascinating. I do kind of wonder at the drastic change inflicted on us by this pandemic. I guess you in New Zealand opened up. You weren't in lockdown for as long as we've been. You know, we've been constantly in a state of staying home, of not supposed to be gathering with anyone who you absolutely don't have to. So anyone who's looking for new friends, new anything, love, it's really been almost an impossible need to fill. Other than of course online, but we all get people are so Zoom fatigued. And then of course when we come out of the pandemic and this lockdown is behind us, and hopefully for good. Then there's the question of what's left, because of course a lot of the businesses that thrive on numbers of people gathering in smaller spaces have been basically wiped off the map. And what's going to be left? Where are friends and lovers supposed to go? At least for the first while. I've gotten a book, Friends: Understanding the Power of Our Most Important Relationships by Robin Dunbar. He was the guy who figured out that we were evolutionarily programmed to basically relate to and keep track of something like 150 people at a time in terms of real solid relationships. And that's kind of a not exactly a hard limit, but something close to it. That sort of keeping track of acquaintances. Then there are kind of levels of that. There are the close friends. There are the acquaintances that we see, sort of maybe talk to reasonably regularly. And it kind of goes out from there. So apparently the close-in friends and family are going to be fine according to what this guy's thinking. But the farther out, like the second level of acquaintances beyond the first, say, 20 or 50, you're starting to get into that level where there is going to be a lot of widespread loss of relationship there. So that'll be interesting to see as a society how we sort of cope, how we bounce back from this. And I'd hate to think it's been a one-way trip, and that it's just always going to be a more sort of cautious, more defensive society from here on out. But I guess that is a danger. I kind of wonder how much compassion we've lost, how much empathy we've lost in our efforts to protect us from COVID.
Thanks, Mike. You talk about Zoom fatigue, and I was reading an interesting article about Zoom fatigue the other day, and every single criterion that they outlined for Zoom fatigue was visual. So I wonder whether blind people get this Zoom fatigue thing. I certainly don't. And when it first came up, I kind of thought, what the heck are people talking about? But it does seem to be a very visual thing. And I don't think the pendulum will ever swing fully back. Here, where we're basically back to normal most of the time, what I'm seeing is a reluctance of people to get on planes, take all that time in airports, which are never very pleasant places, spend all that time flying to a venue, having a meeting, getting back on the plane and going home. What people want now is a better quality of life. And they know, having become used to the technology, that they can be just as effective on a Zoom or a Teams meeting without all of that travel, without the unnecessary expense. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with conferences in the future too. Things like the blindness consumer conventions in the United States. Not long ago, I attended the PodFest conference, which was held virtually, that I would never have considered going to if it was in the US, where it usually is physically. The world's opened up, and I think people have become quite happy a lot of the time to do these things virtually. And as somebody who lives in New Zealand, so geography's a factor sometimes with things I want to go to, as someone with a hearing impairment, I'm always thinking there's a silver lining to these things. And if one of those silver linings is that we're all a bit more embracing of virtuality, then that's rockin'.
Hey, Jonathan, Scott Davert checking in. It was about 6 years ago now. I did some research, or was asked to do some research by a university here in New York to find out what the impact of having a disability would have on the online dating world. And I already had my ideas about what that would be, but I went ahead and decided to take this seriously. Well, the study ended up falling through because one of the students that was involved didn't do her part, and I didn't feel like picking up the slack. But they gave me funding to get premium memberships on Match, and there were a couple of others. So what I did was I created a profile, and I had a couple of pictures up there. And those pictures did not have the fact that I was someone with a disability as part of them. One of the pictures, for example, I was hiking in Colorado the year before, and I had that picture taken, thinking that something like that might eventually happen. Anyway, I had that picture taken, and I did not have my cane in my hand. I did not have a note taker around my neck. I didn't have my hearing aids in. But it was a picture of me hiking on a mountain trail in Colorado. I took another picture, or had another picture taken, I should say, on that same trail in Colorado, with my hearing aids in, with my braille display around my neck, and with my cane. So I put these pictures with my profile that did not disclose the fact that I had a disability. I had quite a few interests, several different conversations through text going on. And after about 5 days of this, I decided, hey, let's see what happens now if I post those pictures, which are very similar, taken in, the same environment and everything. I'm going to post those now with disclosing my disabilities. So I did that, and within about a day and a half, all conversations ceased and never resumed. And I didn't hang around the sites too much longer. Only a couple weeks. I had like a month premium membership. But once the disabilities were disclosed, there was no real response. So either you could conclude that my hearing aids and my cane and my braille display look extremely unattractive, or you could conclude, rightfully I think, that the fact that I had a disability visible in my profile contributed to me not getting very much activity on the sites. And at the time, I was fairly bitter about it, really, and kind of gave up on the whole online dating thing and all that. But I've never been one to only date blind women or only sighted women, because I think there's a lot more there than just a disability, even in terms of interests and my interests. But I agree with your point that you may get a lot less activity, but if you don't disclose your disability right away, you're kind of getting off on the wrong foot in a lot of circumstances anyway. That might be angry that you hid your disability. There's a whole lot of different things that can factor into that. And really, do you want to have to live that lie and then stress out about, meeting somebody or having to tell them that this is the actual situation? I'm currently with someone who's sighted, and, we work through these situations really well. I live in an area where I can get to pretty much anything that we need to access. So if she's not able to drive, I can be a supportive partner. And I think that's the point. You have to be able to be supportive, and it doesn't really necessarily matter if you have a disability at all. Are you a good communicator? Are you someone who is willing to step in and be just as much of a support as the other person is? I think those are more important things to look at, as opposed to, whether the person you're with is blind or sighted or, any other characteristic they may have. The other thing that I wanted to cover was it wouldn't be a Scott Devard post if there wasn't some mention of braille displays, right? So the Brilliant BI40X, I have it here. One thing that you guys left out in the interview that you did with Humanware was the C keys. The C keys are those buttons that are located to the left and right of the braille display. And unfortunately, at this moment, they're not working in iOS 14.5 Beta 4. That's the latest out as of this recording. But I love those on the previous generations of Brilliance, because they allow you to not only, say, do a chorded command, like if you do the command keys 1, 2, and 5 together on iOS, you'll go to the home screen. Command key 4 will take you to the next item. C key 1 will take you to the previous item, and so on and so forth. And if you don't want to use them for that purpose, that's fine. You can reassign those commands anything you want. Like I said, it's not working yet in 14.5 Beta 4, but I have contacted some folks in Humanware, and they said they've already made Apple aware. The other thing I wanted to say about the Brilliant BI20 and 40X is that Executive Products cases will be shipping in April. And the case on the 40 is actually fairly nice. I don't think it was as terribly made as the Chameleon case. So, if you want just a case and you don't need like a zipper pocket on it or anything like that, the default case that comes with the Brilliant BI40X should suffice, I would think, for most folks. I certainly have no problems with it. I haven't taken it into the warm sunshine very much yet, but it just feels a lot more sturdy and a lot better build quality.
Lovely to hear from you again, Scott. Thank you for the intel. I had a Brilliant BI20X to review, so this is the first time that I've heard of these C keys, command keys, on the Brilliant BI40X, and that sounds like a really cool thing. And while we're talking about Braille, let's celebrate, let's rejoice. I did something that I have not been able to do for quite some time this week, and that is to curl up with an Apple book and read it on my Braille display, and that's just brilliant. iOS 14.5 Beta 4, which has now gone public as well, does have a fix for the auto-panning issues. We have heard people talking about this on the podcast in the context of Voice Dream Reader, Apple Books, Kindle, anywhere where that auto-panning feature has been used. There were focus issues there. They have now been resolved. So if that is important to you, as it is for many of us who use Braille extensively, and you're not on the public beta track, it might be a good idea to get it. I was thinking that 14.5 would be out to the public possibly next week, when the rumours were suggesting that we would have an Apple event. Now it looks clear that there is not going to be an Apple event next week, and that may not happen until April sometime. So we could be waiting a bit longer, possibly, for 14.5 to go gold. Who knows what mysteries lurk in the heart of Apple? But if you need it now, and I can understand why you might if you are a proficient and regular Braille user, get that 14.5 Beta 4. It is actually in pretty good shape.
Mushroom FM.
And the show continues here not only on Mushroom FM, but also on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Clubhouse. Nice little group of people tuning in on Clubhouse today in the Mushroom FM Club. Up ahead, why not get Wife 1.0 on the podcast, eh? Now, Amanda is cited, and she believes that there is such a thing as blind culture. Have a listen to what she says, and you can chime in with your own views on this topic.
Mushroom FM.
Music, personality, and fun times on MushroomFM.com.
How do I act? What do I do? What do I say?
Mushroom FM. Mosen at Large Podcast.
If you'd like to comment on anything you're hearing about today, there are numerous ways to do it. You can drop me an email to jonathan@mushroomfm.com. That's JONATHAN at mushroomfm.com. That could be a written down email, or you can give my voice a break and send an audio clip. It could be recorded on your smartphone or your PC, your Mac, anything that records and can attach as a MP3 or an M4A file. That'd be great. You can also let your voice be heard via the listener line. That number in the United States is 864-60-MOSEN, 864-606-6736. And the Mushroom FM Twitter hashtag is available, so you can just send a tweet and put the hashtag Mushroom FM in it. It'll get to me. Now, Peg Jolene, who I think is actually in Clubhouse listening today, has done that. She sent in a tweet, and she says this: I met my sweetheart on eHarmony. We have been married for 16 years. I openly disclosed my blindness in my profile and included a photo. So you see, it can work out. Let's just see if I can get this. See, it's my ex-wife we're moving to now, so that's why it won't play. That's what my theory. Hang on, let me just see if I can go into the right window, push the button, and see if we can talk to Amanda. When people talk about deaf people, we always hear about the deaf culture. It's ingrained in the deaf community, and it is quite effective in many ways. But there's a lot more debate about whether a blind culture exists or not. Someone who thinks it does is someone who has observed blind people in a range of habitats for well over 2 decades now. And if you've been listening to this show for a long time, you may remember Amanda when she was Amanda Mosen. Now she's been rebranded, and she's, rebranded actually, and she's Amanda Goff. So welcome, Amanda. It's great to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm not sure about this rebranding,
well,
but yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know how to do that introduction, really, so we'll just go with that. I could say Wife 1.0, I suppose, but...
yeah,
that's so, okay. Now, why did you get interested in this topic?
I think because... Well, firstly, I need to start by saying that I work for an organisation that has an interest in this area, I guess, and I don't speak on their behalf in any way, shape or form. I'm just speaking for myself at this point.
Right.
I guess how I became interested was because I felt from my lived experience that there was a blind culture when I was mixing with various blind people from all sorts of different walks of life and ages, and it's not something that's easy to put my finger on necessarily. But if I'm in amongst a bunch of blind people, I can once again pinpoint that that feeling is there, that I am in amongst that culture. And I know the cultural norms, and I notice when other people come into those settings who don't necessarily have that same grip on the cultural norms. And there are definitely just ways that things are done, ways that things are said, that to me says, yes, this is a culture.
What constitutes a culture? I mean, before we go into what that culture looks like, can you define what you mean when you say culture?
Yeah, I don't know if I can exactly define it, but I don't think that a culture has to be a very specific sort of group with a ring around it that can't be part of other cultures or other groups. But I think it has certain defining characteristics that are common across that group, and it has cultural norms. And by cultural norms, I guess I mean ways of behaving, ways of interacting, and it has a shared history, or it has parallel histories that are similar, and it also has, to some degree, a shared language. Now, by language, I definitely don't mean like English or French or Spanish, because I think you can speak the same language of that type as
So
other
sort of like a
people, but it will
lexicon
have
is what you're talking about, is that right? More
yeah,
than,
I guess so. Yes,
yeah.
so it would be certain terminology that pertains to things that happen within that culture, or short forms for things, acronyms, those sorts of things that, you talk about O&M, for example, and anybody within the blindness cultural field will know what O&M is. But if you say that when you're just talking to the guy at the takeaway shop, he will have no idea.
But I suppose the same could be said of people who are into computers or, astrophysics. They've all got their jargon, but does a jargon constitute a culture?
Not on its own, but I think it is one of the aspects of that culture.
When you and I met, and obviously I started introducing you to friends of mine who were blind, and I remember one amazing night when we had a whole bunch of people over at your place, and it was probably your first kind of en masse introduction to a bunch of blind people. The thing about that, of course, was that all of those people, by virtue of them being friends of mine, had very similar shared experiences to me, in the sense that we started going to a school for the blind and were then mainstreamed in due time, which was sort of how it was mostly done then. But if you've got a blind person who has been mainstreamed since the beginning, which is how things are done now for the most part, does that culture exist? I guess, is it blindness that's the common denominator here, or is it just that series of shared experiences that constitutes the culture that you're talking about?
I think that it's both. And so the fact that you have shared those experiences enriches the culture. And so there is that whole tuakana taina, is, for those of you who aren't local, big brother, little brother, passing on of information that's kind of intergenerational, that was able to happen in those former institutions where blind people lived, or at least were educated together. And the older kids would have picked up stuff from when they were little from the kids who were older than them, and they're now passing it down to the younger ones, and so on and so forth. So whether it be that you've worked out how echolocation works, not by talking about it under the terms of echolocation necessarily, but just by people clicking their tongues as they walk past, down the street, and then someone else tries it, and someone tries clicking their fingers, and it all kind of builds from a shared need, I guess. But then when you have the kids now who are being taught in their local school, and you get them together, you still see aspects of that culture coming through, probably not at the same level. And I think that there are certain things about the culture that are probably being lost because of that. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to interpretation. But I think that you do still see certain aspects of that culture coming through. For example, one of the cultural markers might be talking about Braille. And so all these kids may be learning Braille individually in different places, but when they get together, they are able to have discussions about funny quirks and, something funny that came through with their particular translation software or something, and they get it. So, and I think that getting it is an important factor.
I'm pretty open-minded about whether a culture exists or not, but something you just said really resonated with me that I want to explore because I think it bolsters your case. There was a time, atrociously, that Māori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, were punished for speaking their own language in the school system. And I think of how, as a child, I was actively discouraged by teachers of the blind then from using echolocation. And I actually first came across echolocation because I heard Don McKenzie, who I know sometimes listens to Mosen at Large, who was, I think, either chairman of the board then or on the board of the Foundation for the Blind, using it when he came out to the School for the Blind that I was attending. And I kind of thought, well, if a successful blind adult like that, he's a physiotherapist, he's a very important person, and I could hear him clicking his tongue just to kind of check what was around him and where objects were. And I thought, I do that too, but if he can do that, then I can do that. And I was really surprised when I was essentially told not to do it, that it was a blindism, it looked stupid, and yet it deprived me of a lot of very useful information in the process, being discouraged from doing it, as all of the blind kids were. So I think in a way, that's kind of a suppression of culture, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think if the blind community can accept that they have a culture, and it's not for me to tell the blind community what to do, but if you can say this is part of my culture, this is a cultural norm, there is a reason for me doing this, and it is a cultural reason as well as being a useful thing, I think that there's a good chance that you would have more traction.
Traction, what does that mean in this context?
Traction as far as having that accepted by sighted people. I think there are a lot of blindisms out there, and we have to, I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent here, but we have to look carefully at those blindisms as they are known and see why they exist. Do they exist with a purpose, and that purpose being to achieve something more independently than you would be able to if you weren't doing it? Or are they just because you haven't had the opportunity to observe normal social behavior and you don't know any better? And I think if there is a purpose behind it, then you have every right to say, this is my way of knowing that there are buildings I'm going to bang into or whatever. You have your way, which is using your eyes. I'm not going to tell you not to use your eyes, but at the same time, I would appreciate it if you could understand that this is something that I need to achieve the same outcome.
Yeah, so you have to draw the line somewhere there, don't you? Because, of course, as I always say, blind people totally rock. But if you you have blind people who are rocking around, and not just the Christmas tree, and you have people eye poking and stuff like that, that serves no particular. Well, I don't think it serves any purpose. I guess it makes some blind people feel good to rock, doesn't it? And it helps. I know that some blind people say it helps them think when they do the eye poking thing. They're sort of sitting there, head ducked over a Perkins brailler with a finger in their eye, and they say it actually does help them focus. So, where do you draw the line on that?
It's always a bit of a grey area, isn't it, in there somewhere? But I do know that there is a purpose to eye poking and to rocking and all those sorts of behaviours that probably wasn't understood so much in the past, but now we can see that that provides sensory stimulation, and a brain is generally wanting sensory stimulation all the time, and vision provides an awful lot of that. If you haven't got visual input happening, then often you'll find that you need to do something else to give your brain that sensory stimulation. And sometimes it's just a matter of working out what is socially acceptable that will give you that give you that stimulation, so that you are able to function. So there's a purpose to all of it, nearly, but sometimes there has to be a bit of balance in there, and you have to think, okay, well, if I'm getting sensory stimulation by poking my fingers deep into my eye sockets, but when anybody looks at me, it makes them feel physically ill, so they're not actually going to want to hang out with me, then maybe I can find some other way of getting that, or maybe I'm just going to do that when I'm home alone, and I'm going to recognize that that's not something that I'm going to do out in public.
So when we were talking about this, and I said to you, you should come on Mosen at Large and talk about this, one of the things you were recalling was, I think it was that first time that we got a whole bunch of people over at your place, a whole bunch of blind people, and we had some wine. It was probably really cheap plonk in those days, I'm sure. And people had filled up these very nice wine glasses that I think belonged to your mum, and we were running our fingers along the top of them and commenting on the pitch of the kind of whistle that you get when you do that trick. Is that a part of the blind culture, or is that just because since blind people consume a lot of audio, if you will, because we live in an audio-based world, we're just interested in that stuff? You see what I'm saying?
So is having a common interest not something that would mark a culture?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, say, coming back to the Māori example again, if a lot of Māori people enjoy playing the guitar, let's say, which is a horrible stereotype, does that make it part of the culture? Or is it just an interest?
I don't think a culture can be defined by things that are only exclusive to that group. Just because Pākehā people might enjoy playing the guitar as well doesn't mean that guitar playing couldn't be a part of Māori culture. Just because somebody else might enjoy something, or it may be part of things that they do every day, doesn't mean that it can't be a cultural marker for a culture that they are not a part of. If a lot of blind people have a strong interest in sound, for example, that does become a cultural marker, because it's something that is very common to that group, rather than just something that you can sort of take it or leave it. I know if, for example, you get a bunch of blind people together, there will always be someone who can play the piano. Now, that may be a stereotype, but I would challenge you to find me a bunch of blind people of 3 or more who just randomly came together, and you couldn't find a great pianist amongst them, and that everybody knew the words to all the songs. And yes, I am making stereotypes here, I know, but these are the sorts of things that, for me, as an outsider, I would see all the time, and they did become, yes, that's just a part of the culture.
These days you've got people who grow up quite isolated from other blind people, which wasn't always the case. And so it may be that it will take some years before they come together with a group of blind people. And I'm wondering whether you find that in that eventuality, there are kids who sort of have a moment where they go, wow, here are people like me. Here are people who like the things that I like and do the things that I do. And suddenly I don't feel so alone or isolated or unusual anymore.
I've definitely seen that. I don't want to speak too much about the job that I do at the moment, but right. I have definitely seen that. I have seen a couple of young blind kids come together and start making crazy sounds on their braille note or whatever it happens to be that they've got, and using the record function and working together, and this whole kind of this other person gets me and I've never had that before experience happening.
So what does that say about the need for blind kids to meet each other and our obligations in that regard, and also for their need to get to know blind adult role models, mentors?
Well, I guess it brings me back to the fact that I think if there was an accepted blind culture, there would be good reason to be able to ensure that that culture was able to be passed down, passed on, shared. If blind people don't accept that they have a culture, then perhaps the benefits would not be seen as being so important for that to be passed on.
I'm interested in this from the angle of blind pride, which is actually a Twitter hashtag I've started using. Sometimes I hear from people who say things like, the greatest compliment someone can give me is to say, oh gosh, sometimes I forget that you're blind. And it's almost as if blindness is something to be put in the background, to be a little bit ashamed of, to not bring to the fore too much. And I contrast that, for example, with the gay pride parades that we have, and the way that the LGBTQ community just embrace what they have, and they assert it, and they say, yeah, this is something that we're proud of. And yet there are a lot of people very shy about doing that. You also have people who take great pride in criticizing blindness-specific products. Like I've heard things such as the Braille Note or the Victor Reader Stream or any of those note-taker products, the Braille Sense, that sort of thing, described as blind ghetto products, even though we're a market that just needs to be catered to like any other market. Somehow anything relating to blindness is sort of viewed in a pejorative sense, even by some blind people.
Yeah, and if I were to compare that, say, with deaf culture, I mean, on their website where they talk in the, I think it's Deaf Aotearoa, is, I believe, a consumer group of deaf people.
Yeah, they are a DPO, yeah, and they provide services, so there's sort of a crossover there. Yeah.
But when they're talking about deaf culture, I mean, that some of their cultural markers that they state are things like deaf people are proud to be deaf.
Yeah.
And deaf people see being deaf as a difference, not a disability. Is there any reason why blind people can't be proud to be blind? Or blind people can't see blindness as a difference and not a disability?
I'm personally very proud to be blind. You will have been familiar, I'm sure, with Kenneth Jernigan's article called Blindness, Handicap or Characteristic. And of course, handicap was a more acceptable term then. I take it you do recall that article?
Yes, not in detail, but definitely the thinking behind it.
So he's essentially making that same argument that it is a characteristic, that whether you're short or have a particular, say, weakness in a discipline like mathematics or whatever, there are all sorts of characteristics that may have limitations that define you. But his argument was blindness is shouldn't be considered disabling.
I think that that's true, and I think that a lot of the disabling effects of blindness are actually socially imposed, and often socially imposed by blind people themselves. So it's not that it's not going to have any limiting effects. It is. Let's get real. But it's how you interpret that. I mean, yeah, everything has its positives and negatives about it, and blindness is no different from that. I think the other thing that sort of relates to that is I often hear blind people say, I'm not going to let my blindness define me. And it's like, why not? Why are you not going to let your blindness be one of the characteristics that defines you?
Yeah.
Because if there's nothing wrong with being blind, then why not let it be one of your defining characteristics?
I agree with you.
I mean, if you're going to let being beautiful be one of your defining characteristics, then let being blind be one of your defining characteristics. It's not the only characteristic that's going to define any of us. But is there really an issue with letting blindness be a defining characteristic?
Because if it isn't, we're essentially allowing the rest of society to define that characteristic as a negative, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so.
You're working on a master's thesis at the moment. Does that incorporate any of this thinking that we've been talking about today?
Well, my thesis is around listening skills, basically, particularly compensatory auditory skill acquisition. So by compensatory, I mean the listening skills that blind people and people with low vision use to enable them to perform tasks or get information that the rest of society gets through vision. So be that understanding where they are or understanding what's happening in their environment or any of those sorts of things. The things that your average sighted person uses their sight to get. I mean, we're told that 80% of the information that we get is through sight. But I've always argued that blind people aren't on 20%. They're getting a huge amount of that other 80% through other senses. So that's sort of where my thesis is heading. But yeah, I think that it does look at the whole cultural thing. And so when we've got those compensatory auditory skills, where are they coming from? How are we getting them? And are they important? And how do we pass them on?
Yeah, and that 80% thing infuriates me because it's often used as a way for employers to think, oh, well, gosh, this person is going to be super less productive than anybody else. And of course, that's something I think about a lot in my day job. So I wish that blindness agencies would be much more careful about the way that they portray that.
Yeah, I think that I'm not saying it's not true that that's how sighted people do get most of their information, but to just leave it at that does imply that blind people are operating on 20%. Now, if you're operating on 20%, you couldn't do the jobs that you have done in life. The blind kids who go to school couldn't do what they do every day. It's just stupid to believe that anybody could operate on 20% of the information that is typical to receive and still be a functioning person. So obviously that information's coming from elsewhere. And so that, I think, is another one of those cultural markers, is that we get our information through different means, and that's part of our culture.
Let's say we assume that there is a blind culture. Can a blind person opt out of it? Because I can imagine, having heard from some listeners in the past on different topics, they will say, look, I've been blind all my life. It doesn't play a part in what I do. I have a regular job and I don't work with other blind people. I don't choose to interact with them, although they're listening to this podcast, obviously. And I choose not to be a part of any blind culture that might exist. Can you opt out?
I suppose at a certain level you can. It depends what you see as being the cultural markers, I guess. I mean, you can opt out and not use... I don't know if you can opt out completely. I think that
like the Hotel California of cultures. You can check out any
you can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. Yeah. I think that it depends how they are defining blind culture. And there may be certain things that they see as blind culture that they interpret as being negative. If you interpret blind culture as being eye-poking and rocking, then you may say, well, I'm not a part of that. I don't do that stuff. So I think it all depends on how we define blind culture. But I don't think we should see it as a negative thing. I think we should see it as a positive thing, and something that being a part of is something we can be proud of. Well, I can't because I'm not part of it, really.
Well, induct you as an honorary member of the Blind Culture Hall of Fame or something, given all you've had to put up with people, doing things with your wine glasses. And so do you think, but just one thing that's occurred to me to ask you, do you think that a disproportionate number of blind people have perfect pitch?
Absolutely. And the research proves it. Adam Ockleford's research in the UK, I think, puts it at 4,000 times more likely.
Really?
For people born blind or who lose their sight before they've developed language. And it's not just the kind of perfect pitch that a sighted person will sometimes, like someone who's really musical, will kind of develop, it's got a different feel to it. It's the whole culture of somebody being able to say, gee, I hate that number 47 bus. I hate the way that the brakes are an F sharp.
Yeah.
It's like, the brakes are what?
Yeah. or that horn of that vehicle going past is like a really cool diminished sixth or something. Yeah.
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 And it's like that is not how perfect pitch amongst sighted people who have perfect pitch tends to operate even. It's got its own, well, I guess it's got the whole concept of having other people around you who get this anyway. So, when you're talking about pitch in relation to non-musical things, you're amongst other people who also talk about pitch in that way.
We had a listener actually who sent in a contribution a few weeks ago, and he made some sort of comment that he was giving a blind friend's direction to get to his house in a neighborhood that this blind person had never been to before. And he made some sort of comment about there's a series of poles along the sidewalk, and when you find the one that's on like a fifth octave F sharp, that's my house. And he found it that way. So it's interesting that, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah, it's great. But I mean, that's another thing, just talking about orientation. I was reading an article the other day, and it was about this guy saying there's a whole difference between blind people and sighted people when it comes to asking the question about where am I? Well, basically, if a sighted person asks that, the next question really usually is, well, where do you want to get to? Whereas for a blind person, it really is, where am I? So if you haven't got, the latest and greatest GPS devices or whatever, and you've had to take a different turn from usual because there were roadworks or, there was something parked across the pavement or whatever, and you've found yourself lost, you're asking, where am I? And then you can use your knowledge to find your way to where you want to be. Whereas for a sighted person, it's where am I, which really means how do I get to where I need to go to?
I suppose that's right. Although a blind person may also need to ask the same question.
Well, they may. And then they will need different information about how to get there.
Yeah, it's over there.
So, well, you go down that road.
Yeah.
It's over there, down that road, and then at the blue house, you're going to turn right. I mean...
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I hope that this provokes some interesting discussions, because I was a bit on the fence, and having listened to this, I think I'm less on the fence. I think I see what you're talking about when you talk about the cultural norms, and they're more than just the shared experience of a boarding school or a school for the blind. It sort of just transcends all of that.
I think so. And I think this, if the blind community are open to the idea of promoting the fact that they do have a culture, then there is a very strong sort of body out there of understanding what it means to be culturally responsive. And if that helps blind people to have their needs met appropriately, because whatever's happening is either not culturally responsive or it hasn't been their culture hasn't been considered, I think that it will actually make life in general easier.
So I was about to wrap, but again, you've just said something I want to explore a bit, and that is that I think blindness is very feared. There's all sorts of research that indicates that some people fear going blind even more than cancer or AIDS or death itself. And so that often feeds into the way that blind people are perceived in society, the blindness employment crisis that exists. Now, I heard something earlier in the week that just appalled me. You will remember back in the 1990s when I took a complaint to the Broadcasting Standards Authority over Sean Plunkett using the word blind in a pejorative way. Believe it or not, this is far worse. So I was listening to Morning Report the other day, and the headline, the intro, right at the beginning from Susie Ferguson, said that the Minister of the Environment said he's blind on the issues at Tiwai Point. And then twice in the interview, the minister said that he was blind on these issues. And basically what he was saying was that he didn't have sufficient information. He wasn't in full possession of the facts. There was unclarity. So he was using the word blind as a synonym for ignorance, stupidity, and arguably not being on top of the political brief that he's meant to be on top of. And nobody during that interview process questioned his use of the word blind in that way. And you can imagine what would have happened had he used a racial stereotype or even said that somebody was behaving like a girl, and rightly so. I'm not denigrating the fact that they would have pulled him up on it. If we claim blindness as a positive and assert our culture, maybe that is one way of trying to put a stop to this stuff.
Absolutely. And I think you have to be really careful how you do that, because blind and anything to do with sight has become so entrenched in our language as almost a synonym for knowledge or understanding that it has become an accepted norm. And that may be why terms like, visually impaired and vision impaired and sight impaired and, the whole gamut have become popularized, because blind itself is being seen as a negative. Now, I think I'll rephrase that. I can't say I think you need to do anything. But if blind people were to say, we are proud to be blind, blind is not a negative term, blind is just a descriptor, but we don't want it misused. And as part of our culture that we are blind, but don't go mucking around with it to mean anything as far as, understanding or knowledge goes, then that could be helpful, I think.
Yeah, it's the same way as the gay community understandably gets very annoyed when you hear particularly young people describing something or someone as gay, basically meaning ridiculous or stupid. And I hope that every decent parent pulls any youngster up who uses gay in that way. There's a lot of it about. Obviously, the word retarded is also often used by young people in a way I find deeply troubling. So you've really got to claim it, and I agree. It's about asserting that pride. Essentially, it's about blind people asserting ownership of the word blind. And really, the way that we use these terms even 10 years ago is completely irrelevant. We're supposed to be evolving as a society, and we just got to knuckle down and speak up against those people who are going to say, oh, this is politically correct. Of course, woke is the latest word. This is woke. This is ridiculous. We can't say anything anymore. We need to claim that word for ourselves.
Yeah, and, it is where it comes from. So let's allow it to go back to its origins.
Yeah.
And not and claim it in that way, and then move forward and suggest that people use words that are more appropriate to say that somebody is lacking in understanding or lacking in knowledge, hasn't thought of another perspective, maybe pushing the boundaries, but hasn't seen it from, and I'm using seen, I guess, in a different person's way. I mean, you get all those short-sighted, it was a very short-sighted opinion, or he was very one-eyed, or all those sorts of terms. It's not just blind. They all relate to sight.
Very good. Well, I hope this stimulates some really good discussion. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really interesting.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm not sure if I've had much to add. And once again, I don't want to try and tell blind people what to think, because that is not my position at all. This is just from my observations as a fairly entrenched sideliner.
There you go. The artist formerly known as Amanda Mosen, wife 1.0. Good to have her on the podcast with some very thoughtful comments. You do find some sighted people just get it, don't you? Every so often you meet a sighted person who really has taken the time to understand and observe and be quite respectful of the right of blind people to determine their own destiny. So, great discussion. Hope you found it interesting. And of course, if you would like to comment on it, you can drop me an email with an audio attachment, or just write it down, send it into Jonathan, JONATHAN, @mushroomfm.com. And the listener line number is 86460 Mosen in the United States, 864-606-6736. Hi, Jonathan, says Carol Ashland. I think there is a blind culture. It is strongest among people who attended a school for the blind. I have found that blind people who went through the public school system are not comfortable with blind people. Some blind people who have not had the opportunity to be around well-adjusted, capable blind people sometimes feel that they have no peer group. I attended the Oregon State School for the Blind for 7 years and then was dumped into the public school system. I had not felt comfortable in the School for the Blind, and I certainly didn't fit in the public school. And over on Twitter, a couple of people who are actually listening on Clubhouse and tweeting in. That's because there's no text chat function on Clubhouse. Bianca. Hello, Bianca. It's been ages since we heard from you. She agrees that there is definitely a blind culture. She says one thing a lot of people haven't talked about is that so-called blindisms are common with autistic people too. And Pam Francis is also on the jolly old Clubhouse listening in. Hi, Pam. She says, I believe there are cultures within every realm of the disabled world, be it hearing, vision, paraplegics, etc.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
Back on the subject of maths gear, and Clinton says, Hi there, Jonathan. Just wanted to let you know that my Cranmer modified abacus is still in use today. I recently started using it to keep track of the phone calls I answer at work, as my employer is currently requiring a daily total of all the various topics and questions that come up in those phone calls, as well as the total number of calls. I keep the running totals on the abacus, so I don't have to have yet another window open on the computer, since there are usually 10 to 15 windows open already during the workday. With the abacus, I can keep those running totals on the abacus during the day and input the final totals on the spreadsheet at the end of the day. This means I'm not using a bunch of scratch paper or using some other phone app or computer program to keep those numbers up to date. I also don't have to worry about losing those numbers. Yeah, Clinton, don't lose that number. If the power goes off or some other technology malfunction takes place. Therefore, as you can see, sometimes old low-tech can still be useful in our high-tech world. Thanks for all your work on this podcast. Thanks, Clinton. Reminds me of that old thing by Wink Martindale. The Deck of Cards. If you've not heard this, you should check it out on your streaming music service of choice. It's about this guy who goes in to church and he gets pinged for playing cards in church. And boy, does he have some spin when he gets tried for play, because he's a soldier, for playing cards in church. So, you know, you could have a similar thing for playing with your abacus in church or something, or playing with your abacus at work. There you go. There's a parody opportunity for someone. Now, Kelly Superger says, Hi, Jonathan. I've been following the discussion about tools people used when learning math at school with great interest. I never was a big fan of math class while growing up for various reasons. Primarily, I think, because I wasn't taught certain concepts very well. I could do addition, subtraction, etc. just fine, and basic algebra was okay, as I recall, but there were other things that I personally found pointless, such as long division. I was glad I had lots of Braille with an uppercase B paper available, as the problems I had to solve sometimes took a few pages to complete. Geometry and trigonometry, which I struggled to learn during high school, were especially complicated for me. Trigonometry was the worst. No matter how much I tried, I just couldn't get it. The other students were using graphing calculators, but there weren't any accessible ones in those days, and I'm now wondering if that would have helped. It eventually got to the point where I experienced a breakdown one night while doing my homework. Thankfully, the teacher allowed me to skip trigonometry at my parents' request. I can't exactly remember how well my Braille textbooks were for my various math classes over the years, but do remember having to use a cassette version of a textbook one year while waiting for the Braille copy to be completed. Give me Braille any day. As for equipment, I used and still have the Cranmer modified abacus, which I now use mostly for doing my amateur radio check-ins by pushing a bead up for each person that calls in. When I get to 52, the total number of 4 beads, I just clear the abacus and continue from 53 onwards. I also was able to take my Sharp EL640 talking clock/calculator to school with me, and it's still working after all these years. It's a shame it's not a scientific calculator, as the one I eventually got in the mid to late 90s was, in my opinion anyway, a complete joke. The school did order one shortly after I began high school. I forget the model number, but quickly dismissed it as not having certain features. They were also rather hesitant to let me try it, but I eventually was able to hear what it sounded like. The voice was recorded, not synthesized, and the guy that did it didn't sound too happy from what I remember. The one I got afterwards was a Texas Instruments TI-66 scientific calculator that had been modified by a company called Captech. The actual calculator was mounted on a large-ish device that contained the speech chip, volume control, speaker, and jacks for headphones and the AC adapter. Now for why I think it was a joke. Unlike the one the school ended up returning, none of the keys on the TI-66 spoke when pressed. You practically had to have the cassette manual, more of a tutorial really, at hand to know what button did what. When you did a calculation, you then had to press one of the buttons that had been programmed to make the synthesized voice read the answer on the screen. However, this button's program could be erased, as I found out soon after. Captech did tell me how to reprogram the button, but I decided not to, once I found out what the actual command was. You just had to press one of the function buttons, followed by the decimal point. I wasn't the least bit sorry to get rid of that calculator years later. It's a shame the iPhone wasn't around when I was in school, as, these days, there are lots of calculator apps to choose from. In addition to the iPhone's built-in calculator, I also recommend the Talking Scientific and Statistical Calculators by Adam Crosser, which can use either VoiceOver or your own recorded voice for the output, and PC Calc, which is also available as a free version that can be added onto via in-app purchases, depending on your needs. As for Windows 10, I've been having fun using its calculator, which I hadn't explored much before the pandemic. It was late last year when I discovered, to my delight, that it also includes a variety of converters for things like time, temperature, and length. There's even a currency converter, which I regularly use when ordering things. I'm now wondering if there are any free, preferably, and accessible online courses for brushing up on math skills. Hello, Victor. Victor says, I can't seem to find the answer to this question anywhere and wonder if you have come across a solution. When using the Mantis Q40 in terminal mode, I cannot seem to invoke the insert key with JAWS. Insert should be function plus F9, but that does not work. I should also mention that this would be an extremely awkward key combination to execute with a third key to perform a JAWS command. I know that I can choose laptop layout to use the caps lock as my JAWS key, but is there another way to assign insert to another key on the Mantis? I find the lack of a dedicated insert key is a design flaw in my opinion, and would much rather have their delete be buried behind a function key instead. Anyway, is caps lock my only option when using the Mantis and wanting to perform screen reading commands, or do I have other options? Thank you. Well, thank you, Victor. I have recommended for years, and I know Eric Damry has as well, that even if you have a desktop keyboard, use laptop layout. And there are two reasons that I think we've been saying this over the years. One is precisely for this reason, that if you find yourself on a laptop keyboard that has some constraints, the commands are going to be muscle memory. But second, even when you're using a keyboard that has the number pad, laptop layout is just so much more efficient because you keep your hands on the home row. So even if you found another way to press the insert key, because you don't have a number pad, you're still not going to be able to do insert with the numpad up arrow for current line or any of those commands. So it seems to me that in the case of a device like the Mantis, then the answer is to get familiar with laptop layout and just use it on all your devices. Obviously, it'll make you think for a wee while, but the commands are very logically structured and it won't take you too long before that is second nature. Now, if you really want to remap the insert key, then there are ways to do that. Microsoft now has its own Windows Power Toy that will do this, although it's not the most intuitive thing from a screen reader user's perspective, in my opinion. Probably the best option you have is Sharp Keys, which is a free utility that you can install, and then you can map keys to your heart's content. What would you map? You could possibly map the tilde key to the insert key, but it's so close to the caps lock key, if you're going to do that, well, you may as well just use the caps lock key. You could, though, use the right-hand control key or the right-hand alt key if you don't use those. I actually never do. For whatever reason, I always push the left control and the left alt. So if you consider either of those keys on the right optional keys that you don't really use, then map one of them to the insert key using Sharp Keys, and then you will be up and running. But I would still recommend giving the laptop layout a try. While we're talking the Mantis, Dawn Davis says, I updated my Mantis Q40 yesterday, but couldn't find any notes or other material to tell me what the update contained or what had changed. I'm just wondering whether you can give me any assistance. Sure, Dawn. I think there are some new languages added. They did post some email to the Mantis Chameleon email list. And if you are a Mantis or Chameleon user or thinking of becoming one, I highly recommend subscribing to that. It's pretty low traffic, but you do get information from APH when they drop a new update and any help that you might need. They're very helpful, the APH team on that list. They also mentioned that Bluetooth pairing should be a little bit more robust now, so that's always a good thing as well. The big one for me is that, like the Brilliant, all the connections are now on one menu. So in the previous version of the update, you would have USB and then you'd have to go into a Bluetooth connections submenu, which just created what in my mind was always an unnecessary layer. So people will have heard me going on, like Jonathan does all the time, going on about how inefficient it is to switch from one connection to another, particularly from a USB to a Bluetooth connection. And it is better now that they're on the one menu. It's not as good as I would like it, because what I would still like is the ability to not have to press enter when you're executing a command. So if there's only one device in a list that begins with a certain letter, you would press that letter and voila, that's actual French I'm speaking there. Voila, you would be in the connection. That'd be good. Other than that, minor bug fixes from memory, I think, Dawn. Rachel Graff writes, Hi, Jonathan. I just wanted to thank you for the amazing demo and review you did of the Mantis Q40. As an avid Braille, with an uppercase B, user, and someone who prefers to type rather than Braille, I have been keenly interested in knowing more about this product. I currently have a Braille Note Apex with a QWERTY keyboard, but just heard that support for it is ending shortly, so I may be in the market for a new display. I have a quick question for you, re the Mantis, which I hope you'll be open to answering. Well, for only twice my normal fee, Rachel, since it's you. Is it possible, she says, to read BRF files in the book reader? I have an SD card full of books from Bard and Bookshare that are mostly in the BRF format, and I'd want to be able to read those on the Mantis. Is it possible to do this, or would they need to be converted to DAISY format? Thanks again for an extremely informative and professional-sounding review and demo. I appreciate it so much. Well, thank you for your lovely email, Rachel. It's always nice to get an appreciative email to know that, something you've worked on hard is appreciated, so I'm very grateful for it. Thank you. The good news for you is yes, you can definitely read BRF files in the book reader in the Mantis. What I would recommend to you, though, is if navigation is important in any of these books, and if it's just fiction, then the answer is it's probably not. You're going to read books like that from cover to cover, aren't you? But if you, by chance, ever look at reference books or recipe books, anything like that, I would re-download from Bookshare in DAISY format. The reason for that is that the navigation is fantastic with DAISY files in the book reader and the Mantis. They've done a good job of implementing DAISY navigation, so if you have to zap around the book to get to different sections, it's going to be a snap. But yep, no problem with the BRF files. And the next email, I am not sure who it's from because the email address is popping up in the from field, but no name. However, I think it's a last name, Dravont, that I'm seeing in the email. And the email says, Dear Jonathan, I am a regular listener to your Saturday afternoon show, and if I'm not around, the podcast. Thank you so much for your contribution to the blindness community. You do so much to help us better use the access technology that is vital to employment, education, and participation in the community. Thank you so much. Last Saturday, someone wrote into your show about a problem they were having with how JAWS sounded on their new Dell computer with headphones plugged in. I think I actually have the same Dell computer you have, but only the 13-inch model. Anyway, I had the same problem as the other listener. JAWS sounded strange whenever I plugged in earphones through the earphone jack. It drove me crazy. Like him, I looked around in the various settings trying to see what to change. No luck. The very morning of your show, I had posted to one of the blindness listservs to see if someone else had the problem. Well, that very afternoon, you addressed the issue. Wow, how serendipitous is this? Serendipitous. JAWS now sounds normal when I plug in headphones by the headphone jack, and I no longer cringe when I have to use headphones. I am primarily a speech user, but don't know what I do without Braille, with an uppercase B. I know there has been considerable discussion on using a Braille note taker versus a standalone Braille display with a computer or iPhone. Last month, I finally got a Mantis Q40 and love it. I prefer typing on a QWERTY keyboard over a Braille keyboard. I can simply drop my hands down to the Braille display to check what I typed and quickly return to typing. I don't have to worry about using the layered keystrokes for use of the function keys either. Back in the 90s, I owned an Alva 340, which allowed the user to sit the keyboard on top of the display just behind the cursor routing keys. This meant that you could just type and drop your fingers down to the Braille when you needed to look at the keyboard. Using the Mantis gives you a similar ability. The only file type I think the Mantis is missing is the accessible PDF files. HIMS seems to be the only note taker on the market that can handle this file type. I don't think I'll ever buy another traditional note taker. I can check email and go on the internet using my laptop or iPhone using speech. Given Apple's inconsistence in the Braille area, I don't want to rely solely on just a Braille display connected to my iPhone or iPad. There are many users whose only option is Braille. I wish Apple would open up a bit and work with and listen to various organizations to make sure that Braille is a priority when it comes to blind users. I need a way to read most books, even when Apple breaks something in VoiceOver. Also, when you connect a Braille display to read books or take notes, it seems that you are burning 2 batteries. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much. I must say, I've changed my mind a bit on this issue. You will recall that on this podcast, you're right, we have talked about Braille displays and using them with an iPhone, but I've come to the same conclusion you have. The fact is that Apple's stuff is just too unreliable to depend on, particularly in the Braille area. Things keep being broken. And if you rely on Braille to get your job done, to perhaps perform in a meeting situation where you might need to unlock your iPhone and have it work instantly, the 14.4 issue is a really serious issue, and that is the current released build. So people whose Braille devices are affected by this, and who haven't got on the beta track, for good reason, are still suffering with this bug. And people who aren't affected by it either because their device is still working fine or they don't rely on Braille in the way that some of us do, can show a discompassionate approach and be smug about the fact that Apple will fix it one day. That's not good enough when you are reliant on this stuff to get your job done. So maybe the note taker hasn't had its day until Apple get its soup together regarding Braille, or You might need to use a laptop with your Braille display more often than your phone if you're really reliant on this stuff. This is again where I agree with you. The Mantis has just been a wonderful innovation in my life. The fact that I can connect it to my laptop or my phone and actually connect it to both of those things and switch between them seamlessly and be able to just type without complex commands to remember, it really is a game changer. Fully agree with you regarding PDF files as well. I would add one more file type to that list that I think is essential for a device like this, and that's EPUB files. If we could have those, I'd be really happy, because a lot of book repositories, particularly those that pride themselves on offering unencrypted content, do use EPUB, and there's a lot of navigation information that's stored in those files. So it's really easy to zap around to a chapter or a particular page or whatever your requirement is. Thank you for your views and for your very kind comments. While we are talking about things Braille, here's Will Lomas, who says, "Hello, I am writing to give my thoughts on the new Brailliant X series. I took delivery of my unit today and noted that the 19th cell of the 20-cell unit is not showing all the cells properly, so an L looks like a K. Has anyone else notice this?" No, Will, I didn't notice that when I had one, but I can tell you that sounds like a defect, and I would definitely call HumanWare support about this. The first thing to do, remember that there are lots of moving parts in Braille displays, and gunge can get in them, although you would hope that you would get a Braille display that was gunge-free when it arrived out of the box, but you should follow HumanWare's procedures that I'm sure are in the manual or on their website or that support can talk you through for cleaning the Braille display, and just make sure that there's not some little speck of dust or something like that that's preventing that dot 2 from coming up. It doesn't take much to obstruct it, so hopefully they might be able to talk you through getting that fixed. Also, says Will, when I press a routing key to unlock my iPhone 11, I hear the time, but no speech prompt to enter my passcode. What am I doing wrong? I think you have to swipe up from the bottom to get to the password screen. Well, I think that's the trick there, but good luck with your hardware issue. I hope that can be easily resolved. And Liel from Israel has been in touch, and he says that when he uses JAWS sometimes with his computer connected to USB, sometimes his Braille display just stops responding, it locks up, and the only thing he can do is unplug it from the USB and plug it back in again. Now, I don't know, you didn't say, Liel, what Braille display you have, but I have definitely seen this with a Focus 40 Blue. In the days when I would go into our national office and I'd have this docking station thing and my laptop and the whole shebang, I would sometimes connect the Focus and be working away, and it would just stop responding, like you say. And I thought initially that it might be to do with a firmware upgrade that I did to the Focus, so I downgraded again. I got the old firmware file and I downgraded, and it didn't help. It seems to be related to certain USB ports in my experience. So, Liel, if you can get back to me and let me know what Braille display you have, that would be interesting. Because if it's a Focus, it would suggest there may be something going on there with that particular display. If it's not a Focus, then it could be a JAWS driver issue. Hour number 3 of Mosen at Large is coming at you at the home of the Fun Guys Mushroom FM, and also on Facebook Live, YouTube, and in the Mushroom FM Club on Clubhouse. At 5 p.m, you've got to tune back into Mushroom FM, because that's where you can hear Steve Cutway with another edition of the early years. At 7, this is all Eastern time, of course, it's Dan Sweeney and One Hit Wonders. And at 8, we go live to the Snowman and Snow White FM.
Mushroom FM.
Mushroom FM is variety.
You play all my favorites.
We play what you, the listener, wants to hear.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
A reminder of that contact information again, should you wish to be in touch. Jonathan, that's JONATHAN at mushroomfm.com. You can attach an audio clip or just write something down. You can also call the listener line on 864-60-MOSEN, 864-606-6736. And, of course, you can also tweet with the Mushroom FM hashtag. Just write the number sign and Mushroom FM anywhere in your tweet. You can track that hashtag as well and join in the conversation. Now, from New Zealand, the home, once again, of the America's Cup It's Bonnie Mosen.
Hi, everybody. Hi, guys.
The current, the incumbent.
Eternal.
Well, yeah. What did you think of Amanda's comments on blind culture?
I thought it was very interesting. I mean, this topic has come up before in various incarnations, places, and she made some really good points. I think a lot of it, and she did touch on this, is what is culture? How do we define culture? And everything has its own subculture, I guess, because I was thinking, being a horse person, there is a horse culture, and there are groups within that culture. There's writing cultures, there's, in any kind of community, I guess you might say, has some kind of culture.
Yes, I suppose any community, whether it be a geographical community or maybe the theatre community, for example,
absolutely.
has a culture. And so it doesn't mean that by belonging to one culture or being at peace with being a part of a culture that you aren't a part of many other cultures. So you can be a New Zealander and absorb New Zealand culture and still be involved in blind culture.
Yeah, so it's because I think in the past we've sort of looked at culture as being, okay, I'm Italian or I'm of Italian heritage. So, I
didn't know that.
Oh, I'm not, but I mean, I'm just using that as an example because
for instance.
Well, there are certain, groups that have a stronger culture, and like the Italians, and at least in the U.S., I think the Italians and the Hispanics, and again, there's different cultures within that group because you have the Puerto Ricans who celebrate different sorts of traditions, and Mexicans that, with Cinco de Mayo and, the Puerto Rican Day Parade, that sort of thing. So there are different things within that culture, but yet they're separate. And
one thing that got me thinking as I was listening to this exposition from Amanda is the way that we can apply this to the way that we expect our technology to be designed. So clearly the accessibility overlay companies are coming under a lot of heat from some in the blind community because they weren't consulted when these things were put together. But you also see this, even though people think that Apple's doing a wonderful job overall, there's a frustration that there's a clash. And I think you could argue it's a cultural clash between Apple's culture, and their culture is definitely, we know what's best for the user, we are secretive, you'll know what you get when you get it. And the culture that has been established from a long time ago, where blind people have traditionally known who their assistive technology designers are, and they want to engage with them. I mean, everybody who wants to knows how to get hold of Eric Damery, for example. And you can go onto the Eyes Free list even and talk via that email list with a number of senior Android developers. It doesn't take too much to know who the key people at Amazon are either. But Apple, it's much more difficult, and even if you did manage to find who those people are, they're not really encouraged to talk to you. So that's a cultural clash, I think.
Yeah. Again, a part of that culture, because businesses have culture, different organizations have culture, like you just said.
Yeah, I mean, we think a lot, as a chief executive, I think a lot about our organization's culture and what's it like and can we better it and stuff. So, I think you're right. It's all in the definition, isn't it?
It's all in the definition because I think we automatically default to nationalities or, ethnic groups or religions or, whatever that's more of a kind of a tangible thing, maybe. But, It is a very broad scope with culture.
Yeah, interesting. It'll be quite fascinating to find out whether people chime in on this. And
it was interesting, the part about blind pride. I thought that was kind of interesting. And I guess I don't really think of myself as being proud to be blind. It's kind of like, do I think of myself as being proud to be a blonde white female? It's just not something that I really sit around and dwell on because it's part of it's just part of who I am. It's something that I can't change. So, but I haven't been blind all my life, so I don't know if that makes it a difference. But I don't really think of myself, am I proud to be blind or if I'm not proud to be blind? It's just is.
I'm proud to be blind.
Yeah.
I'm very proud to be blind. And the reason for that is that this comes back to the social model of disability, which we've talked about on this show before, where instead of talking about people with disabilities, which is essentially sort of blaming the individual, the individual has the disability, we in New Zealand now talk about disabled people, which essentially says it is society through its poor choices that is choosing to disable us. So following on from that, I am proud to be blind on the basis that despite a disabling society, I'm rocking. No, I'm not rocking. That's bad. There's a blindism. but I'm achieving. I'm succeeding.
Yeah.
I'm proud of that.
And I guess I don't think about it. So maybe I am, but I just don't. It's just what I am. You know, it's funny because there are certain aspects, again, within the blind culture that I'm proud of. Like I'm very proud to be a guide dog handler. I'm very proud to be a Braille reader. You know, and again, and within any culture, there are little subcultures. The horse culture example, racing, who everyone hates. And then you have the show jumpers, which I've also been a part of, and then the rodeo people, and, you know. So I'm proud, very proud to be a guide dog handler, very proud to be a Braille reader. So I guess...
With an uppercase B.
With an uppercase B, exactly. So...
which, in my mind, is a source of pride in being a Braille user is capitalizing the B.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. Yeah. Do you know if they capitalize Nemeth, by the way?
Yeah, because it's a name.
Well, so is
I know, but yeah, they do. Yeah. So
Isn't that...
they do?
Are you sure?
I think so.
See, that's just jolly inconsistent, isn't it?
I think so. I'm pretty sure they do. Someone can correct me, but I'm pretty sure I've seen it capitalized.
We had
Not that I use a lot of Nemeth code because I am not a maths person, but I'm pretty sure I've seen it capitalized.
Yeah, it was pretty cool to actually talk to the real live living Nemeth when he was living. Yeah. It really quite something. Now, on to other subjects. We had a fantastically exhilarating week this week because once again we have won the America's Cup. Yeah. The America's Cup is once again New Zealand's Cup. It remains. So this is yachting. And New Zealanders are a bit deluded if they think that somehow this has given us a lot of publicity. I mean, people are saying...
Not really.
I guess it must be quite, I don't know, demoralizing for many people who are watching the yachting from all around the world. It's been taking place in Auckland, in the harbour here, and... they've got these really fast, it's like Formula One boating. I mean, these things are literally flying above the water. And apparently it's quite spectacular, especially when they crash, which they do sometimes. They fall off the fours and fall in the water, and then they get very stuck.
The American boat, like, completely capsized.
Yeah, but I think what people have seen is obviously we've got no COVID in the community, and so we've just had a normal event, and that must be quite a spectacle for people who are still trying to get things under control. But, you know, I don't think hardly anybody cares about the yachting.
No, unless you're in that culture, the yachting culture, then it's important.
The yachting culture.
The yachting community, yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, I don't even know if I saw it in the sports pages of any, I don't know. I mean, it may have gotten
it was in The Guardian and a few other things, I think. But what I like about it is that there's so much technology behind this. I mean, what's making those things kind of fly above the water and everything is very complex, cutting-edge technology. And the fact that a country of 5 million people, you look at the countries we have beaten in the 4 times we've won the Cup. We've beaten the United States twice. We beat a Swiss... who do we beat? We beat Luna Rossa, that's right. We beat them twice as well.
Yeah.
We beat them twice as well. So, you know, billionaires funding these things, and yet this little country of 5 million people can do that. It's a wonderful thing.
And just for the record, there are billionaires funding our team as well.
Well,
Emirates.
Sure. I mean, you know, yeah sure.
it's a rich man's race.
It is, yeah. There's a lot of money
like
that
horse
goes
racing,
into those
yeah,
things.
It's a rich man's
Yeah.
race. Sport of. I don't know what it would be. We call ours the sport of kings. I'm not sure what that would be. The sport of sportsmen. Maybe that would be.
Well, and it was traumatizing because what happened is we won it in 1995 fair and square, and then we won it in 2000. We defended it here in New Zealand, and then Switzerland, of all people. I mean, they don't even have any water.
They don't have a water.
What are they doing?
They have a lake. They have Lake Geneva.
Switzerland came along.
Streams.
The Swiss business syndicate with this massive checkbook, and they basically bought all our best sailors away.
Yeah.
Which really caused a lot of bitterness in 2003, you know, the sort of 30 pieces of silver. And we had a spectacularly catastrophic America's Cup in 2003, and there was a lot of bitterness. And it took us until 2017 to win it back again. And so, you know, it's something that New Zealanders really do care about.
Yeah.
It's quite exciting.
And they want to keep it in the family again in the next 4 years. So I guess we'll have to see what happens with that.
Yeah, but it was really something. There was just that wonderful sense of euphoria, and they reckon that they had over 200,000 people watching it in Auckland.
Hopefully no super spreading.
No, well, if we've got COVID, we sure as heck are going to know about it.
We got to know about
with
it
that many
now.
people,
Yeah, exactly. 2 weeks. Stay tuned.
Yeah. Go.
All clear signal.
So it was a wonderful thing, and the Italians put up a bit of a fight. We eventually won 7 races to 3. So, but there was a point where it was tied up at 3 each, and then we won the last 5 races. So, yeah. All right. Very good. Anything else going on you want to tell?
Oh, we did
world
the
about?
disclosure.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, we've been active on the jolly old Clubhouse, and of course, the show is going out live on Clubhouse. It's really amazing to see a number of people there. We've had over 30 people in the room, which is a lot fewer who listen on Mushroom FM, but yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And we decided to have a discussion yesterday that ran 2 hours about when, whether, and how to disclose your impairment in a job
interview.
situation.
Yeah.
What are the highlights of that discussion for you?
You know, with disclosure, it's a complicated issue. There are no right or wrong answers. I have heard what we call employment consultants here, what we call in the States VR counselors or job developers, whatever, tell people to disclose. My personal opinion is don't do it unless it is advantageous to you. If you're applying for a job in a disability field or a blindness specific field, definitely disclose it and go from there. Although sometimes those areas can be more discriminating than general, employers. I have found that in the past, long time ago. But yeah, so it is just it's all about the spin. That's kind of the bottom. There was a lot of people, I think the majority of people felt that you should not disclose unless you have to. And then we talked about, and it has changed, and I am not currently in the employment field, but it would be interesting to find out what people are saying now that a lot of things have gone virtual.
Yes, and also I think attitudes have changed. So sometimes human resources departments do have various objectives in terms of making their workplace more diverse.
Yeah.
And they might say, we'd like X% to be someone who is disabled.
Yeah, that's a tough one because we talked about that because diversity doesn't necessarily, in my experience, cover disability. They talk the talk, but whether they actually will walk the walk. I know what I did on one application is I saw where they had put that prominently on their website. We wanted a diverse and inclusive workspace or, company. And I did use that in my cover letter. So, again, it's really knowing it's marketing. You're marketing to an audience and really knowing who or what that audience is.
It was really interesting hearing from Grant Patterson yesterday, who was talking about how he chose not to disclose and he actually missed out on a job because they gave it to someone who was blind, not realizing that he was blind.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's becoming a more nuanced issue.
It's very nuanced, and sometimes you just have to go with your gut. Sometimes you just really have to go on instinct. And if it's a job, again, researching your company that you're applying for, know everything you possibly can, look at their social media, that sort of thing, and just really tailoring there's not in this situation one size that fits all.
We hosted the event yesterday in the 15% Club, thinking that we might get a pan-disability audience, but to the best of my knowledge, what we largely got actually was a blind audience.
Yeah.
So we will probably do future events like this in the Mushroom FM Club.
Yeah.
So if you're not following the Mushroom FM Club and you're in Clubhouse, then follow it today, and we will do more because it was a really interesting discussion. It's kind of like having a cuppa at the Mosen's back, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
Only much better.
You think it's better?
I think so.
Yeah. How are you finding Clubhouse?
It's good.
Debbie Armstrong's going to comment on Clubhouse later in the hour.
Oh, is she? Oh,
Yes.
cool. I like it. I don't have a lot of time. I only really go to things that particularly interest me.
I envy the people who seem to be on there.
They live on there.
24/7.
Yeah, some people do. I think some of them must be somehow paid by their company or something, because there's some that are on there a lot. You're always seeing creating rooms.
Like the person from the Small Steps and Giant Leaps, who's
program.
called Alda Riley. We're
Yeah,
not quite
that's-
sure what the personal gender pronoun is.
Yeah,
or whatever.
but they're always-
But they're on all the time. Alda Riley's
there's a
on all the
few.
time.
There's Eugene Baugh and Eric Wine. I mean, there's several names that pop up, and I'm not sure who some of these people are, but that's okay. But I did go to some PR and communications things this past week that were absolutely
I've done
fantastic.
some good stuff.
So, and a couple of horse things. I haven't been able to really pop into the horse things because a lot of stuff happens while I'm sleeping.
Or while you're supposed to be working.
Or while I'm supposed to be working. And I get pings like, oh, you need to
You should join this room.
I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I don't particularly want to, but whatever, go away.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's. I was in.
There's definitely a culture on Clubhouse, isn't
There's
there?
definitely a culture.
Yeah.
I was in the Seeing Eye room yesterday, and that was really nice. So I enjoyed that. There wasn't a lot of people in there, and it was, just nice to just sit and chat with people that I know. A lot of them I've known for years. Or
Have you got more invitations? You must have. You must have some more.
no. I mean, yeah, I've gotten a couple equestrian ones.
No, sorry. What I mean is like invitations
that,
to Clubhouse
10.
of people
Yeah, I
are
have
wanting to
10.
get on. Oh, right. So if you email me, if you're not on Clubhouse and you want to get on, email me to jonathan@mushroomfm.com, and between us we can probably set you up with an invitation to Clubhouse. But what you should do, for those who didn't listen to episode 99 of the Mosen at Large podcast where we talked about this, set up your Clubhouse app, because what then happens is that people who have you in their contacts who are on Clubhouse get told that you're waiting, and if you're kind, then you will let waiting people in. Yeah.
So
All right.
it's nice. It's really. I don't know if it's been around a year because they were having a lot of birthday celebrations the other day. So it seems to be, having a good run as far as social media is concerned.
Watch this Twitter space. That's what I say.
Yeah,
Watch this
so
Twitter space.
I don't know.
We'll see.
It's social media's
I mean, I think Clubhouse may well have just established such a sort of become a part of people's lives that perhaps they will be able to withstand Twitter spaces.
I
But
think
we'll have to
they
see.
might, because one thing I've noticed when I was in the communications and PR the other day, and they were talking about new methods for 2021. And one thing that I think has happened is because of the pandemic that people are zoomed out. You're always on video, and this is all audio, so you can.
So is
do,
Twitter Spaces, though.
Yeah,
It'll
so
be all
it'll be
audio
interesting
too. Yeah.
because people were when they pulled them up on the stage. Well, I'm walking my dog,
Yeah.
or I'm. So you don't have to worry about being presentable. I mean, one girl was like munching on her. Whatever she was munching on.
Yeah,
It was
that's a
bit
bit
weird,
gross.
but whatever, and her dog's barking in the background. But her dog has become part of the. Oh, that's Coco.
Yeah.
It's sort of become a character, or not a character, but a part of that particular culture, which is great.
That's kinda
it was
cool.
it was really good. I really really enjoyed what I listened to.
Well, I'm glad that you're enjoying it with your millions of followers on Clubhouse?
Not really. I have 137.
Oh, well, people can follow
We're
Bonnie
getting
on,
there.
People can follow Bonnie on Clubhouse. Yeah, I'm following you.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for a really interesting Bonnie Bulletin. And we'll have to watch For All Mankind today.
Yeah,
we haven't watched
will.
it this week yet.
No, we didn't get to. We went to Anthony's house last night, so that was nice.
It was nice, yes.
Yeah.
Good food, too.
Yeah,
Good.
very,
Only because
very.
his mother was there, though.
Oh.
Yeah.
You don't think Anthony can cook?
No, I don't.
And he can call Uber Eats.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we'll do if we go there again when his mother's not there.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
Hello, friends. This is Mickey Quinzer. I have a quick question for everybody today. I have a friend who has her father's funeral service on Facebook Live. She wants me to take that file and make it into an MP3 file. I understand how to do that, but what I don't understand is how to actually get to the file and save it locally on my computer. Is there anybody who could help me with that? Thanks.
Thanks, Mickey. And I did prioritize this one to the sort of top of the queue, so I got here today because clearly that's a terrible thing to be going through when you have a friend who has a bereavement. So I don't know the answer. I don't use Facebook very much at all. So if anyone can help with that, then hopefully they can be in touch and let us know. And I may even just forward you the responses, since I can completely understand that this one is a time-sensitive one.
Hey, Jonathan, it's Debbie Armstrong, and I have a gripe about Clubhouse. I am not interested in growing my business. I have a perfectly good full-time job. I don't want to start a business. I don't want to build my brand. I don't care about marketing secrets. And I'm not interested in becoming an influencer or creating a podcast. But I do follow influencers, podcasters, people who want to build their brand. And I think that's fine. I may want to consume a product your business sells. I may want to become a client of a service you provide. I am certainly an audience for your podcast and many other podcasters as well. So just because I'm not a leader doesn't mean I'm not important. If, for example, everyone who listened to your podcast wanted to become an entrepreneur, they'd be too busy entrepreneuring and not listening to you. So every influencer needs an audience. Every business needs consumers. Every service provider needs clients. Why is my hallway filled with all of these crazy sessions that I'm not interested in simply because I follow people who are interested in them? I need to see rooms that are related to what I want to be, a consumer, a client, and an audience.
It's a very good point you make, Debbie. Good to hear from you again, by the way. And I think there are several things going on concurrently, simultaneously, and at the same time. There's a culture about Clubhouse that has emerged since it began a year ago, where a lot of people from Silicon Valley, influencers, were given invitations first. So what you're seeing is quite an established culture of the sort of, build your brand, influence, get rich quick, Bitcoin's on there. I think that culture will probably change as the platform goes more mainstream. Eventually they'll move away from invitation only. Eventually they will get an Android app. And so you will see that culture change. So it does come down to who you follow. But I do agree with you. That's why we have set up a Mushroom FM club on Clubhouse. And if you are interested in any Mushroom FM shows, including this one, that club is for consumers, if you will, listeners to our content. It's not about how to start your own internet radio station. It's about connect with Mushroom FM fun guys that you might hear on the radio and get to speak with them and get to know them. And I do hear a bit more of that starting to happen now. So, if people are too spammy about the grow your brand and stuff like that and it doesn't interest you, then you can unfollow them, I guess. But you make a really good point that people may be losing potential followers based on the content that they create. So in my case, we do have quite a successful wee club on Clubhouse called the Blind Podmaker, which is designed for people who want to make or who are currently making podcasts to share ideas. But I am also a part of other things that are more about just consumption. And I do notice that because blind people have been using these audio things for a long time, they are tending to just do generic chats, which I must admit, just as a busy person, I'm not really interested in just hanging out and shooting the breeze without a purpose. I do find it helpful to create rooms that have a clear focus, even when that focus is consumption. But in the end, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Clubhouse will be what you want it to be, based on what you create and who you follow. It will be very interesting to see what kind of a different culture Twitter Spaces has when it officially launches and comes out of beta. Oh boy, looks like Soup Drinker is coming to a home near Peter, because he writes, "Hi Jonathan, I'm planning to buy an Amazon Echo Dot. This will be my first smart speaker. My questions are, 1, do I understand right that settings are only available through the Amazon app running on smartphones? There's no way to handle it on a regular PC in a browser?" No, Peter, that is not the case. You can point your browser to alexa.amazon.com and log in, and not only set your device but also maintain settings. I think it is fair to say, though, that if you go beyond the basics of setting it up and doing a few things, there are probably some tasks that could be smartphone specific. For obvious reasons, I don't use the browser interface very much, but I have, and it still does exist. So you should be okay if you don't have a smartphone that can run the app. 2, if that's the case, which I've just said it is not, is the Amazon app accessible with TalkBack on Android? My Android version is 5.1.1. My phone is a Samsung Galaxy J3 2016. I know you use iPhone, but maybe you still know the answer. Well, I don't know the answer definitively, and that is quite an old phone, Peter, but what I can say is I haven't seen anyone on the social media chastising and castigating Amazon for not making their Android app accessible, so I'm assuming that it is. But if there are Android users who would care to comment on the accessibility of the Amazon app, that would be a great service to us all. And 3, when unpackaging and setting up my Amazon Echo Dot, will I need some sighted help? I am completely blind. It is unlikely that you will need sighted help, Peter, if you're comfortable with setting up new gadgets. The process is accessible, so if you do need additional help, it's unlikely to be because you've hit an accessibility brick wall. It could just be because you're doing something new and unfamiliar, and that's perfectly fine. But the process is accessible, and I have actually set up an Amazon Echo some time ago now, to be fair. It might be 2 or 3 years ago, so I can't comment on the 2021 experience with any authority. But when I did this, I was able to set up an Amazon Echo in someone's house with nothing but a web browser. So it's going to ask you to connect to a Wi-Fi network that the Amazon Echo will create to complete the setup, and then help you to join your regular Wi-Fi network. And you can do all of that in Windows, and the process did seem to be okay. But my experience is a little old now, but I've not heard that it has changed. Best of luck, and when you get it up and running, let us know how you get on.
Jonathan Mosen, Mosen at Large Podcast.
Hi, Jonathan. It's Brian here. In Mosen at Large last week, you mentioned about the English being a bit reticent about showing their phones in public. Well, I think this probably stems from a story that we've had quite a lot. And that basically revolves around the stealing of mobile phones when they're out in the open. The way that the gang usually operates is that they've got a moped somewhere. There's usually 2 of them at least. One will go around looking at people unlocking their phones with the keys, as it were, in other words, putting in the PIN number or whatever. And they will target these people when they next take their phone out. And what happens is one's on the back of the moped and the other's on the front. And they're quite quiet mopeds, and they come along behind the person while they're on the phone. reach over, grab the phone, and then ride off up an alleyway somewhere. And this has happened quite a lot. In fact, the police have put out warnings about them and have tried to tackle them. This seems to mainly happen in areas where there are lots of alleyways and lots of back doubles and little back alleys to houses and shops. So consequently, with all this publicity, I suspect a lot of people have been frightened. Also, of course, it does seem a very difficult thing to do when you're blind, because nobody really is watching out for you, are they? Except for yourself, and you can't see. It's a bit like trying to use the cash machine on your own when you're out, because obviously people can be watching over your shoulder to see what PIN number you put in and you wouldn't know. I think that's where this comes from. Myself, I don't use my phone very much for navigating outside. If I do, then I tend to use it when I'm out in the country somewhere, because then there's nobody about. So that's what I think the problem is, and maybe others with other views, I don't know, but I wonder if this is different in other countries. Maybe they don't have the moped thieves that we have here. It always reminds me a bit about the old Oliver Twist story, with Fagin running all these kids, and these youths are usually quite young, on stolen mopeds with no indication of what the number was, and they're obviously taking these things back to somebody who's giving them money so they can buy their drugs or whatever. That's the way I see it anyway. That seems to be the way that it's put forward on the news that I listen to.
Ah, Oliver Twist. You gotta pick a pocket or two, Brian. You gotta pick a pocket or two, Brian. Or perhaps Monty Python put it best when they said,
"Don't take it out in public or they will stick you in the dock and you won't come back."
Yeah, I think it was the phone they were talking about, wasn't it? We're saying hi to Ed McDonald. He says, "Hello, Jonathan. My wife Karen and I have been regular listeners since stumbling upon your return to the podcast world several months ago. I am often a few episodes behind, but eventually listen to nearly everything." Well, thank you, Ed and Karen. You and I have communicated by email a few times over the years, and Karen met you briefly at an NFB convention a decade or so ago when she bought a Packmate. Although I am notoriously slow to embrace new technology, both of us have recently acquired mantises. Is that the plural of mantis, or is the plural of mantis manti? Anyway, it says, "And I am using mine to write this message." Oh, it's coming up beautiful, Ed. Beautiful. That means I am, he says, for the first time, using a combination of speech and braille with an uppercase B on a Windows PC. I have worked for nearly 50 years in most aspects of broadcasting, mostly in public radio. In, quotes, retirement, unquote, I became the founder and manager, actually pretty much the entire staff, of an LP-FM station in Kesa maybe, West Virginia, WKYW-LP. I love those American call signs. AKA Mountain Streams Radio. The station offers a totally automated format of folk and traditional music, with an emphasis on local and regional artists. I am, of course, using station playlist, thanks to the Broadcast It tutorial. After 4 years of operating as little more than a jukebox with a few local PSAs, the station is now in a position to move to the proverbial next level. The local tourism office is taking over the license currently held by the County Historical Society, and we are at last preparing to launch an online stream. I am also planning to launch a modest amount of voice tracking, and we will be recruiting additional volunteers to host some of our program schedule. In preparation for these improvements, we have secured funding around $2,500 to build and set up a new automation computer. With that in mind, I was interested in your comment on a recent episode that your son-in-law had built a new machine to run Mushroom FM. If such documentation is available, I would be interested in seeing the specifications. We certainly want to equip the new machine with a robust processor and plenty of RAM, but I am particularly interested in making appropriate choices for storage, drives and audio interfaces. Such matters are beyond my expertise, so any guidance and suggestions are welcome. I want to use the money wisely to build a reliable and good-sounding system. Thank you, Ed. I remember fondly our correspondence on all of this, and it's great to see that the station is thriving by all accounts. So that's absolutely brilliant, and I look forward to tuning into the stream when that is available. If you are going to host your stream with a streaming hosting provider, which I would recommend you do because they can maintain the servers for you and that kind of thing, really broadcasting with Station Playlist isn't hugely CPU intensive. So if you get an i5 or an i7 processor, I would recommend 16 gigs of RAM minimum. Again, I come back to the fact that I think the RAM is really important here. You should be cooking with gas. Even the audio interface is not that important if all you are doing is voice tracking. That's because Station Playlist sends its audio through its own studio pipeline, which is all software rather than hardware. Where the hardware would be relevant is if you're going to go live and you want to connect an audio interface to a mixer and sit behind the mic in a broadcast console and do things that way. If you're going to do that, then there are many really good audio interfaces out there. Complete do a nice one called the Complete Audio 6. I'm using the Focusrite Scarlett range. I have the 8i6, which is a bit of a big kahuna, but you can get smaller Focusrite Scarlett devices. They do have some awful accessibility issues getting them set up, but once they are set up, they seem to stay set up, and they're very good quality. Motu, M-O-T-U, also do some very nice and actually much more accessible audio interfaces, and there are some pretty low-cost Behringer audio interfaces. But if you're just going to be getting volunteers to voice track in their own homes, and you're going to be doing it all through Station Playlist's audio pipeline, then really the audio interface doesn't have to be fancy at all. You may be able to get away with the audio that's built into the motherboard. The one thing I would say is that when we built the Mushroom FM PC, we used a mechanical hard drive. And we did this because, well, it's a little bit cheaper, and also because solid-state drives do have a theoretical maximum number of reads and writes, although in a radio station environment, it's unlikely you're going to achieve that before you do something else with your computer anyway. And we just recently replaced the mechanical hard drive with a solid-state drive. The reason why I did that was because Station Playlist is actually pretty busy at startup, and we found that after upgrading to the latest version of Station Playlist, we were getting some very odd things where its fail-safe timer was timing out and basically starting multiple copies of itself. It's really important that Mushroom FM stay up as much as possible, and we have all sorts of means to ensure that that happens. For example, I can use the remote desktop protocol to remote into the machine if ever I need to do any maintenance, and I can sit in front of my computer anywhere in the world on my laptop, and it's as if I'm sitting in front of the computer in the studio where Mushroom FM is, and Jaws is running, and I can do everything as if I was sitting in front of the computer. We've also made sure that the computer responds to wake up over Ethernet, which means that even if you're away, if you've got the right utility, you can wake the computer up if there's a power outage and you need to start it again. And there are computers with BIOSes, by the way, that will start themselves. If they detect that they've been shut down improperly because of a power outage, when the power's restored, some of these new BIOSes are intelligent enough to restart themselves, and I would highly recommend that you get a BIOS with that capability in your new machine. But the other tool that I use that's absolutely invaluable is an iOS app called Pulseway. This consists of a little server that you install on the broadcast machine and a 100% accessible iOS app. So you run that on your iPhone, and that app is called Pulseway. And when it's set up, you can monitor the computer. You can check all sorts of things. You can check the temperature. You can check what processors are running, all from an accessible app. But also what you can do is restart it. So if something goes really seriously wrong, and this sometimes would happen, and I was on the other side of the world, I could just load that app and choose to restart the Mushroom FM PC, and it would restart. You can also now set up Siri commands for this. So I can say to Siri, restart the Mushroom FM computer, which is a command I've got set up, and it will do it. And typically I do this. You could put this on a task scheduler as well, actually, and just automate the whole thing. But typically I do this when the snowman is on live on a Saturday night US Eastern time. And he's on for 3 hours, and sometime during that 3 hours I'll just load up Pulseway on the phone and reboot the machine, because it's always good to reboot Windows every so often to keep it behaving. It is not like Linux, where you can run it for years and years without a reboot. So those are a few thoughts on your new PC. I wish you all the very best with it. It sounds like a great project.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
Dave Baker is back. Hey, Jonathan, congratulations on your 100 episodes. I appreciate your tech reviews and commentary. But so often, search, in quotes, is made synonymous with Google. Have you tried any of the alternatives? I used DuckDuckGo for years, but now switched to a new one. DuckDuckGo is good, but there's a new one, ecosia.org, and that is spelled Ecosia, ecosia.org. This one plants a tree for every search. It even tells you how many trees you've planted using that specific browser on your machine. I really like them. They have the same layout as DuckDuckGo mostly, but I've joined many in my community of independent artists in using Ecosia. The holdout was Safari for the longest time, but in the most recent Mac and iOS updates, it's finally included as a search engine for searches from the address bar. I really like how they've leveraged search technology with a great cause, not just planting trees, but empowering disadvantaged communities around the world. Dave has a second point, which I'll come back to in a moment, but I should first say I have not heard of this before. And I mean, I read a lot of tech news, but I've literally not heard of it before. I have used DuckDuckGo, and I tried switching to it for a while, but what I found was that Google gave me what I was looking for so much more quickly, particularly when I was searching for New Zealand-related stuff. Google knew to prioritize New Zealand things, and DuckDuckGo did not. But this Ecosia sounds really cool, and I will check it out. Dave continues on an unrelated note. Why do people not capitalize Braille with an uppercase B? I have heard that this is some new convention, but have never been given a reason for it. We capitalize things that are named after their inventors. I cannot, for example, imagine not capitalizing Moog when referring to the 70s monophonic synthesizer largely invented by Robert Moog. Well, actually it was in the 60s because they used it on a Beatles album, Abbey Road, in 1969. So while, he continues, you have the same preference that I do for capitalizing Braille after its inventor, why is this change in convention to lowercase? I've yet to hear any real explanation for why they decided that. Okay, are you ready, Dave? And anybody else interested? Let's go back to 2006 for this statement from the Braille Authority of North America. And it reads, many individuals, organizations, corporations, and government agencies have asked the Braille Authority of North America, BANA, what its policy is on the preferred capitalization style for the word Braille. Believing that the issue is a true policy matter with far-reaching implications, BANA, as the standard-setting body for Braille in the United States and Canada, is issuing a policy statement on this matter. Most agencies and organizations in the blindness field throughout the world follow the practice that does not capitalize the word Braille unless referring to the name of Louis Braille or to a proper name such as Braille and Talking Book Library, Agency, Braille and Speak, Product Name, or Braille formats, Principles of Print to Braille Transcription, Book Title. Even though the tactile reading system was named after an individual, it does not necessarily follow that the word be capitalized. This type of word is termed an eponym, a word that comes from someone's name. Consider the words what, match, sandwich, Tattersaw, Foldy, Wellerism, Bowdlerize, Spoonerism, and many others. All were once people's names or referred to a specific person. They are now just nouns and verbs spelled without a capital letter. Their lowercase status was acquired because the word has assumed such a commonplace role in the language. Braille, as the representation of the code created by Louis Braille, has become an important, recognised and commonplace part of the landscape of life. True acceptance of Braille as a viable medium for reading, and not a special or unusual item, includes not setting it apart by writing it differently. As testament to its acceptance, it has acquired the right to appear in the language as a lowercase word. Efforts are ongoing. See, they're coming to take me away. Can you hear that? They don't like me reading it. They're coming to take me away. Efforts are ongoing with style manual publishers and the makers of the Microsoft Office Suite Dictionary to advise them that the blindness community prefers the word Braille to be represented as Braille with a lowercase b. Position. Banner recommends that the word Braille, when referred to the code developed by Louis Braille, be written with an initial lowercase letter. When referring to the proper name of Louis Braille, the inventor of the reading system, the initial letter should be capitalized. So that is Banner's statement, and as I have said before, and written on my blog, I have a totally different view of this. You can argue the case both ways, of course. Morse code is written with a capital M. Celsius is written with a capital C. There are numerous examples of people who have invented things that are still capitalized. And in my view, remembering the sacrifices that Louis Braille made so that so many of us can read and use that gift to work and succeed in life is a matter of plain respect. The thing that really gets me about this statement is reference to the blind community. When this change sort of trickled down to New Zealand, I wasn't consulted, and I don't know of many blind people who were consulted. In fact, this is a timely reminder that the conventions are coming up of blindness organisations in the United States soon. I would love to see a resolution using classic NFB language condemning and deploring the Braille Authority of North America for doing this. I don't think that they have a mandate to say that the blind community wants this. I'm not saying it's universally accepted that Braille should have an uppercase B, but a lot of the blind people I talk to still write it with an uppercase B, are proud of the fact that Louis Braille, a blind guy, invented this code, which we should capitalize in the same way that Samuel Morse invented a code that we still do capitalize. Thank goodness no one's come out in the ham radio community and said, don't capitalize Morse. Oi. So the conventions are coming up. If you feel strongly about it and you're a member of either consumer organization, it's a chance to lobby and get it fixed. Capitalizing Braille, it's the right thing. It's the respectful thing.
Hi Jonathan, I am Anil. I want to talk about a couple of things you mentioned for this week's Mosen at Large. Coming to maths equipment in the past, I used during my schooling a product called Taylor Slate. Here the people called it as Taylor Frame, which has holes to put pegs in various shapes by which you can use calculations. It was very helpful, but the process is very slow and it had its limitations, like when you get a brand new Taylor slate and pegs, they are very tight fit. The plastic pegs and slate are available in the market, but they break easily. The biggest limitation is that it was hard to distinguish the difference in shapes of geometric pegs. One more thing is that the pegs contain lead, which is harmful. Coming to the economical scanning solution, until recently I used a product called Lex, which is actually developed for dyslexia students, but it is helpful for visually impaired persons also. This is made by Vision Aid International. I will provide their website link. The good thing is that the support for this product is still available. I don't know whether support for OpenBook and Kurzweil 1000 is available or not, but the product has various glitches with latest versions of Windows, like intermittently stops speaking, and sometimes it does not scan pages while you press enter key, etc. These are small bugs but very frustrating.
Thank you, Anil, and I will put the full link to that software that you mentioned in the show notes. Thank you for sending it through. For those listening on the radio or who find it difficult to access the show notes, the homepage for the company that Anil mentions is www.visionaidinternational.com, and that's all joined together, www.visionaidinternational.com. Kim Paul says, I live and work in Midtown Manhattan, USA. Like you and so many of your listeners, I now require a screen reader to access technologies. And thanks to COVID and remote learning, I am mastering my first Braille with an uppercase B display, my first pair of made-for-iPhone hearing aids, and walking everywhere with my guide dog. Wow, you're living the dream, Kim. Another gift of COVID is extra time, not commuting to work, so I can explore and listen to terrific podcasts like yours, so thank you. I am reaching out to share with you and your listeners a strategy I have found greatly improves my chances of arriving at my destination on time when using ride shares. Once my request has been accepted and a vehicle is on its way, I locate the app's Contact Driver button and send a special text message to the driver. My message says something like, I am waiting outside of the curb. I have low vision and a beautiful yellow guide dog. I am hard of hearing. Please let me know when you arrive so I can locate your car. My reasons for each of the statements and this process, which of course we shouldn't have to use in the first place, are 1. This is a text message, which I suspect can be reviewed by the rideshare company later to support the fact that I was outside and watching, which is another excuse I've been given when I contact a company, after the driver pulled up, then drove away. 2. I use the word beautiful to indicate my dog is clean, another excuse I've heard used for other people but have not experienced myself. 3. I have indicated my disability and what I want the driver to do when they arrive. In some places I may be more specific, asking the driver to honk their horn or open the door for me. An additional bonus of this method is that if the driver cancels the ride anyway, at least it happened sooner, and a new vehicle will be on its way much sooner than waiting for it to pull up and then drive off. I hope this is helpful to you and your listeners. I deeply appreciate the variety of issues you and your listeners discuss relating to the real-world experiences encountered when living life with blindness, and for many, hearing loss too. Although technology for vision loss and hearing loss is a critical topic worthy of the attention we give it, so too are the other aspects of our lives. You are doing us all a great service. Nice to hear from you, Kim, and that is a very handy tip. I've done a similar thing, but what I do to speed it up is I have a thing called text replacements that I use that's built into the iPhone. And if anyone wants to try this, the quickest way is to ask Siri to open keyboard settings. And when you go in there, you'll find an option called text replacements. What you can do is enter a string of characters and then a much longer thing that will replace that string of characters when you type it. So, for example, I have one called UBX, because I never type the letters UBX together in any other situation. And it's short for UberX. And when I type it, and you have to press the spacebar, it inserts something into the text message which I have open when I type UBX in the spacebar, like, "Hi, just to let you know that I'm a blind person, I'm outside the building, I'm carrying a white cane. When you pull up, I won't see you, so if you could please get out of your vehicle and find me and bring me to your vehicle, I would really appreciate that. Thank you. And all of that is typed in by typing UBX in the spacebar. I do have another one, UBB, which stands for Uber with Bonnie. And I have used this sometimes, which basically says we're standing outside the building, I'm blind with a white cane, and my wife has her guide dog with her, so please look for us. I've used that sometimes, and I have had a refusal that way. But you are right, if you do get a refusal under those circumstances, you've got the record. And Uber can look back at the text message conversation and see that you've got a naughty driver. And I did have a driver who refused and said, I'm not going to take a dog in my vehicle. And I then called the driver and said, you got to, it's the law. And he still declined. And so the good thing is, as well as all the additional information, which I always copy to the clipboard, whenever an Uber is assigned to me now, I copy their information to the clipboard in case I need to make a complaint. But then that text message history also works. But that text replacement feature is very handy for building up a little repertoire of messages that you might like to send to an Uber driver. And that's about it, really. It's been another very busy show. Thank you so much. You're welcome to get your contributions in for next week. And a reminder that we may well be popping up with various things on the Mushroom FM Club on Clubhouse. So if you're not following that, then do feel free to do that. It's a new and exciting way, new and improved way of interacting with us. But in the meantime, it is time for me to make way for Steve Cutway. If you're listening live on Mushroom FM on a Saturday, and I'll be back with you next week for another edition of Mosen at Large. Until then, look after yourself, and I'll see you on the Mosen Explosion on Mushroom FM throughout the week.
Mosen